There are not many things to enjoy in this world. The sudden appearance of a truck cut short the life of 25-year-old Yasuhiyahagi in an instant, leaving a cold void in his chest from an unchosen ending. In his final seconds, he hears a voice coming from the sky. It tells him that a unique profession awaits him in the new world, but the rest of the story dissolves into darkness before he realizes it. The next moment, he finds himself in a strange office, sitting in line for the mysterious distribution of professions for reincarnation. Someone in front of him is called a monk, says a wish to enjoy his new life, and the person disappears in a blinding light. Someone in line in front of the hero whispers under his nose, wondering what profession will fall in the next life. The air is filled with tension. At that moment, the next person is announced, and Yusuf freezes in horror. He can't figure out if this is really reincarnation into another world, or if it's all just a dream. The guy who is just speculating about his future profession suddenly starts excitedly telling him that he was hit by a huge truck, weighing as much as 10 tons. He's clearly proud of it, as if it's an accomplishment. People around him look at him with bewilderment, not understanding how he can brag about such nonsense. He was next in line, and the guy was given the profession of an aspiring magician without much ceremony. There seemed to be no connection between the weight of the truck and the level of the profession, as if everything was determined by chance, not by the circumstances of death. Next in line was our hero, Isekai'd. He had been given a profession as a pastry chef in the family store. His insides clenched with surprise. No battles, no magic, just sweets and cozy pastries. He wanted to ask what it all meant, but no sooner had he opened his mouth than a strange energy enveloped him, and the man wished to enjoy his new life. In an instant, everything around him disappeared, as if the world had snapped its fingers and changed scenery. He realized that he had no freedom in choosing his profession after reincarnation. Everything had already been decided by someone in advance, and his opinion didn't matter. He appeared in the middle of the street in an unfamiliar world, and immediately felt that everything was different here. The street was empty and looked strange, almost unreal, not at all like the world Yusuf had lived in before. The city didn't resemble modern Japan at all. Yusuf noticed his reflection in a puddle on the wet sidewalk and froze. He looked exactly the same as before, and was wearing the same clothes. What was the point of reincarnation then, if he was still in his body, and everything seemed to be a continuation of his previous life? The next moment, he noticed a group of adventurers walking down the street. They were dressed in armor and robes, their faces focused and their gait confident. It was then that he finally realized that he was truly in another world, and everything that was happening was not a dream, but a new reality. Yusuf decided to follow the adventurers, keeping his distance so as not to attract attention. Soon, he heard scraps of their conversation. They were discussing witches, witch hunting, and upcoming quests. One of the adventurers even taunted his comrade, saying that if there was anyone to be cursed, it was the one who had suggested the witch hunt in the first place. Yusuf was delighted. He understood every word, and it seemed incredible. The language of another world was as clear to him as if it were his own. Soon the adventurers reached the entrance to the dungeon. A sign hung above the massive gate, and Yusuf was surprised to realize that he could read the local alphabetic language as easily as his native tongue. He stood there for a moment, staring after them, and wondered if maybe this was a job for them, as mundane as an office or a store in his former life. He began to look around and noticed that the place he found himself in was much larger than it seemed at first glance. It wasn't just an entrance to a dungeon, but an entire station hub for adventurers, where life was bustling. Stalls with weapons, potions, and food stood everywhere. The smell of roasted meat, metal, and fresh bread hung in the air, and the hum of voices blended into a strange symphony of this new world. Spotting one of the food stalls, Yusuf felt his stomach rumble. He suddenly realized that he hadn't eaten anything since his death, and fatigue began to creep up on him little by little. The smell of roasting meat and freshly baked bread only made it worse. He rummaged through his pockets, but realized he didn't have a single coin to buy anything. As Yusu began to ponder how he could earn some money, the owner of one of the stalls threw an irritated phrase in his direction: "If you're hungry, go earn some." It sounded rude, but at the same time simple and businesslike. Yusuf frowned. He realized that he couldn't just go into the dungeon without preparation, without weapons, without even the slightest idea of what awaited him there. More importantly, he was only a pastry chef, and the realization of that clutched at his heart. And suddenly it hit him. He really was a pastry chef. Not a warrior, not a mage or a hero, but someone who could make sweets. The thought seemed ridiculous, almost pathetic at first, but something inside him trembled. Maybe that was where his strength lay. The world had chosen this profession for him for a reason. Hearing the hint that simply saying the word opening was enough to open his own shop, Yusuf tensed with surprise. He began to look around and soon spotted a vacant corner by the wall where he thought a shop might well be. The place seemed inconspicuous, almost secluded, and he hoped there was no one around to interfere or taunt. As he uttered the word opening, Yusuf felt unfamiliar objects suddenly appear in his hands. He lowered his gaze and noticed with amazement that his clothes had changed as well. It seemed to him that the confectionery looked different. But these sweets were exactly the same as when Yusuf was a child. The names may have been different, the inscriptions may have been written in strange letters, but he recognized the wrappers unmistakably. But Yusuf had no experience in sales at all. He realized that he had to make up his mind, otherwise he couldn't survive in this world. Gathering the rest of his courage, he took a deep breath and started calling out to passers-by, trying his best to offer to buy candy. But people passed by. No one even cast a glance in his direction. And then, after once again shouting the word dagashi, which meant cheap Japanese candy, Yusuf noticed one of the passing adventurers raise his head and stare at him angrily. The stare was so heavy that Yusuf was silenced in the same instant, and his heart sank. He instinctively jerked back as if he had encountered a predator. Heavy, oppressive thoughts began to accumulate in his mind. Whether it was even possible to survive selling cheap candy in a world ruled by sword and magic. He continued to shout his sentences aimlessly, but his voice grew weaker and weaker, almost breaking. Continuing, almost crying, he pulled the inviting words again and again, hoping that at least someone would turn around. Suddenly, a girl appeared on the horizon who immediately stood out from the gray crowd, cheerful, enthusiastic, with a slight smile. Yusuf awkwardly asked her if she liked the dagashi. The girl came closer, looking at the display case with interest. The smile on her face grew even wider when her gaze fell on the candy. Without a trace of hesitation, she called the candy's cuteness, saying it as if she had seen something truly magical. Pointing her finger at one of the candies, the girl asked with interest what kind of candy it was. Yusuf, a little confused but trying to look confident, replied that it was chewing gum and named the price 10 yen. But at the same moment, he remembered that yen didn't exist here in this world. The next moment, a system window popped up right in front of his face, glowing with a soft blue light. Inside, the composition of the chewing gum, its quantity, price, and even its magic property were neatly listed. It appeared that the chewing gum restored 1 unit of magic power every 10 seconds as long as the flavor lasted. On a separate line was the flavor, strawberry. Getting a little more confident, Yusuf took the chewing gum in his hand, raised it to eye level, and showed the item to the girl with a slight smile. His voice sounded already firmer when he said that it only cost 10 limas. However, a look of bewilderment appeared on the girl's face. She was looking at the chewing gum with interest, but clearly didn't understand what it was. Yusu instantly realized everything. It seems that nothing like this existed in this world yet. He began to enthusiastically explain what the product was. Chewing gum. It's such a convenient snack that you can chew for a long time without drinking water. Moreover, as long as the flavor lasts, it restores 6 units of magic power every minute. But after he told everything, Yusu realized that the girl wasn't too enthusiastic. Maybe there are better recovery options in this world? In the end, the girl smiled and said that it did look nice. Her voice sounded soft and sincere. She added that she wanted to buy 1 chewing gum for herself and the other, as a gift for Mira. She gave the pastry chef 20 limas, 2 copper coins of 10 limas each. Yusuf was very proud of his first earnings. The girl handed Yusuf 20 limes, 2 copper coins of 10 each. Their clinking as they fell into his palm sounded like music to him. The boy felt a pride that was hard to contain. His first real proceeds in the new world. The girl cheerfully said goodbye and almost hopped away, clutching her purchase in her hands. Yusuf smiled after her and thought that he had to keep up the good work if he wanted to live well in this new world. He felt a surge of energy and determination. However, as noon descended on the city streets, everything seemed to freeze and the streets became lifeless. Yusuf could feel the hunger slowly becoming unbearable. His stomach rumbled and his strength was becoming less and less. Even though he now had 20 limas in his pocket, it didn't solve the problem. He couldn't afford even the simplest meal for that amount of money. Only that one energetic girl had bought his goods all morning, and now the street was empty again. He began to look at his own merchandise. The curried rice crackers were especially appealing, flavorful, crispy, warming and warming. They were priced at 20 limas, exactly the amount he had. Yusuf felt hunger making his mind shake, but at the same time, he couldn't get rid of the thought of what kind of entrepreneur he was if he started eating his own goods. He couldn't think soberly anymore. His head was spinning with weakness, and his stomach rumbled loudly and insistently. He had to. He simply had to eat. Without further thought, Yusuf picked up a single curry cracker, brought it to his mouth with trembling hands, and took a bite. The spicy flavor, the warmth filling his chest, it all came over him at once. They were just like the crackers Yusuf had had as a child. They were also really warming. He shifted his gaze to the next item. It was a squid kebab that cost 30 lim. It looked so appetizing that Yusuf didn't even hesitate. With obvious pleasure, he ate every last bite, savoring every bite. He realized that squid kebab was not only delicious, but also had special properties. Yusuf was almost certain that it wasn't because of its quality that the product wasn't selling. Rather, it was because of the lack of advertising, and he had no experience in sales, which also played a role. Suddenly, Yusuf heard multiple conversations coming from passers-by on the street. He froze while listening and felt his perception become extremely sharp. The effect of the heightened senses from the food he felt was much stronger than he could have imagined. He was ecstatic, realizing that his product had given him not only physical satiation, but also an unexpected advantage. He could now hear and understand those around him much more clearly than before. Just as suddenly, he felt something unexpected. Yusuf realized that even the dryness in his mouth felt stronger now. Every flavor, from curry crackers to squid kebabs, seemed to be accentuated by a new level of sensitivity. He was grateful that at least he had found the water fountain quickly enough. The fountain was indeed beautiful, its shape resembling a lion's head with water flowing continuously from its mouth, creating a soothing, almost magical effect. This moment brought him some relief, and he was glad to quench his thirst. But suddenly his gaze was drawn to an unassuming building at the edge of the street. It looked unremarkable, its facade worn, and it looked like it hadn't attracted attention in a long time. Yusuf involuntarily thought that it must be an inn. Walking closer, Yusuf read the sign that read, Betakuro's Safe House. That name, despite the word safe, sounded completely lame in the context of this dilapidated building. Looking at the price tag, he realized that it was still too expensive for him, especially with his current 20 limes. However, from the looks of the inn, it was the cheapest place he could find. Feeling the night falling behind him, Yusuf realized that tonight he seemed destined to sleep in the open air. He glanced at the setting sun, deciding that he'd better head back to the dungeon, where perhaps he could find at least a little bit of shelter. Yusuf suddenly wondered if the girl who bought chewing gum from him today was doing well. At the same time, the girl who bought the chewing gum was in the dungeon with her friend Mira. Right in front of them stood an elite class rare slime. This creature was a real challenge for any team. Physical attacks had almost no effect on it, and its resistance to magic made it even more dangerous. Mira examined the slime carefully and realized that it would be much harder to fight it than normal creatures. Physical attacks were powerless against its resistance. Realizing this, she made the decision to add magic. The sword of the girl who had bought chewing gum from Yusuf a few hours ago was immediately enveloped in a magical sheath, and its blade was covered in fire, ready for battle. She launched an attack on the enemy. On the first count, she used a powerful triple shot. Unfortunately, on the second count, the girl who bought the chewing gum did not calculate the trajectory of the attack, and the slime quickly dodged, moving smoothly to the side. The girl realized that her magic units were exhausted, and at that moment she felt confused. The magic was no longer under her control, and the slime was already preparing for a counter-attack. At that moment, Mira, who was standing nearby, shouted to her that this was the reason why she had asked her to be careful. Mira, realizing the seriousness of the situation, suggested using a potion to restore magic power, but the girl briefly replied that it was shameful to use a potion against slimes. She was silent for a while, her thoughts darting around until it suddenly hit her. She had chewing gum, the same gum that restored magical power. She remembered Yusuf saying that this chewing gum returned 6 units of magical power every minute as long as the flavor lasted. This was her chance, and she quickly decided to take advantage of this unusual but effective solution. Without hesitation, the girl took out the chewing gum and quickly popped it into her mouth. The flavor was truly delightful, filling her with a feeling of nostalgia and lightness. She felt her magical power returning with each passing moment, and her mind filled with fresh energy. After a few moments, the girl felt a surge of strength and, clenching her fists, confidently declared that she was ready to continue the fight. Her voice sounded firm, her eyes sparkling with determination. Mira, standing next to her, was still hesitant. Such a quick recovery seemed suspicious to her. But looking at her friend's confident smile, she only nodded, unable to argue. Gathering her magical energy, the girl raised her sword, and a fiery aura swirled around it again. A powerful triple shot rushed forward, flashes of fire cutting through the air, going straight for the slug's heart. Night had fallen on the streets of the city, wrapping everything in a soft twilight. The lanterns flickered, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Yusuf stood at the entrance to the dungeon, pensively watching the adventurers returning from battle, their armor scratched and their faces tired but satisfied. Suddenly, through the noise of the crowd, he heard a clear, ringing voice calling his brother. It was the girl who had bought chewing gum from him earlier today, and she was hurrying her friend, telling her to go faster. Mira didn't understand why the girl was in such a hurry. Seeing a familiar face, Yusuf could not resist, and with a slight smile asked if she liked the chewing gum. The girl nodded happily, her eyes literally glowing with enthusiasm. She gestured and began to describe with genuine enthusiasm how the chewing gum had really helped her regain magical energy when all seemed lost. Recalling the battle, She vigorously demonstrated how immediately afterward she performed her trademark triple attack, full of fire and determination. As she continued her story with enthusiasm, the girl specified that the effect of restoring magical power lasted only as long as the chewing gum retained its flavor. As soon as the flavor disappeared, so did the effect. She noticed that the flavor of the chewing gum was very pleasant, but unfortunately, it withered quickly. Nevertheless, it gave her a necessary advantage in battle. Finishing her story, she took a step to the side and pointed to her companion. It was her battle friend, Mira. With a bright smile, Mira took out a tiny piece of paper from her pocket, neatly folded in half. She unfolded it in front of Yusu, displaying the inscription in bright, cheerful letters. Another one as a gift. The note looked like part of some cute raffle from the past. Yusu was taken aback for a moment, but quickly remembered that such surprises did come in old Japanese sweets. He couldn't hold back a smile congratulating the girl on her winnings. He solemnly handed her another chewing gum. The girl gasped in surprise, not expecting that it was not just a decoration, but a real gift. Her eyes flashed with sincere admiration. The girl who had bought chewing gum in the morning puffed herself up, showing feigned displeasure. Her expression and demeanor were full of playfulness, but her eyes were filled with a slight envy of her friend's good fortune. Yusu, not missing an opportunity, discreetly took out a new item from his shop, a chocolate coin wrapped in foil that resembled a real one. The chocolate coin restored a bit of physical strength, and its value was 10 lira. The coin itself was also like 10 lira, but chocolate. It was one of his regular lottery sweets. The girl looked at the chocolate coin with vivid interest. She was clearly amazed at the possibility of winning such a valuable treat that she thought only the rich could afford. Thoughts of winning the lottery flooded her mind, and a sincere hope appeared on her face. Would she really be the lucky owner of the chocolate bar? But Yusu, not missing a chance, explained that if she won, she would not get the chocolate bar itself, but unique points that could be exchanged for various bonuses in the future. These are points that can be spent in the store for the same amount that the item is worth. The girl instantly agreed and held out her money. She bent down and began to look at the goods. Mira, puzzled, asked her what she was doing, to which she briefly shouted back that she was picking. Yusu, with the same skeptical expression on his face as Mira's, called it a silly waste of time. Finally, the girl, a little nervously, decisively pointed at the coin that had caught her eye. But alas, luck had turned her back. Mira, noticing her friend's disappointment, gently embraced her, trying to support and comfort her at this moment. Mira, inspired by her friend's excitement, decided to try her luck at the lottery as well. Yusu held out the goods to her with a slight smile. This time fortune smiled and Mira received a coupon for 10 lira. Yusu explained that she could now exchange it for any item worth up to 10 liras. The girl who had lost the lottery exclaimed with feigned resentment in her voice that luck was always on Mira's side just because of her outstanding looks. Mira, blushing slightly, threw back that it was embarrassing to say such a thing, and she should be the one embarrassed. Yusu froze at that moment in total confusion, not knowing how to react to what was happening. She had already bought 3 tickets, paying 30 lire for them, but this time her luck had run out. The girl's loud voice attracted the attention of the passing adventurers, who approached to find out what was going on and why she was shouting so loudly. However, the girl abruptly turned around to them and, flaring up in annoyance, shouted at them to stay back, because those were her tickets. Yusu wanted to say something, but he was interrupted by the pushy girl, who was already holding out 30 lira for the next 3 items. The adventurers, observing what was going on, noticed that they were cheap candy and found the whole thing quite cute. Yusu had new customers, and his merchandise was to everyone's liking. Some bought gum and chocolates, some chose something else. Yusuf behaved politely, wishing them a pleasant appetite and trying to show his best as a salesman. The screams of Merle's girlfriend, who had been Yusuf's only customer since the morning, turned out to be an unexpected but incredibly effective advertisement. Her emotional reactions and genuine enthusiasm had attracted the attention of others, creating a frenzy around the shop. It was thanks to this burst of popularity, caused by just one customer, that Yusuf was able to avoid spending the night in the open air, the day's proceeds enough to afford a roof over his head. At last Merle pulled out the coupon. Its face value was 30 liras. The girl's face lit up with a radiant smile, and she was literally glowing with joy, clutching the coupon tightly in her hands as if it were her biggest victory of the day. Yusuf politely congratulated the girl, watching her glowing with the coupon in her hands. But in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but notice that Merle had spent much more than she had won. The girl's thoughts were interrupted by a light, almost imperceptible tap on her shoulder. Someone was standing behind the girl's back, silently asking her to turn around. It was Mira, who, watching her friend looking at her purchases with excitement, offered to return to the shop the next day. Merle, with obvious surprise, turned to her and asked if she was being asked seriously, for she wasn't used to such stalls catching her attention so much. Mira, realizing that her suggestion might have been taken ambiguously, hurried to explain herself, trying to soften her words so as not to cause her friend to think too much. Merle answered her that they would definitely be back. They said a loud goodbye to Yusuf, saying they would be back tomorrow. With a smile, the girls left. Yusuf replied that he would be waiting, and thought with satisfaction that it looked like he was getting his first regular customers in his store. It was an encouraging start for his new business. Before finally leaving, Merle decided to inquire about the name of the store. Yusuf realized that he hadn't come up with a name for his business yet. It came as a surprise, but he decided that he needed to figure it out somehow quickly. He introduced his store as Yahagi's pastry shop in honor of himself. The decision seemed logical and even a little proud of him, since he was the one who had created this small business from scratch. Merle repeated the name in incomprehension, as if asking what it meant. Yusuf Yahagi introduced himself, explaining that it was his personal name, and added that he had chosen the name in honor of himself. The girl, upon hearing this, remarked that the name and title were indeed quite fanciful. Mira blushed embarrassedly and called out Yusuf Yahagi. At the same time, Merle thought about the fact that Yusuf was exactly her type, so strange, different, and handsome. His manner of speaking, the modesty with which he presented himself and his store, caught her attention. The adventurers began to discuss the day's events, exchanging news and impressions. One of their squad told Merle that they had finally managed to find the witch they had been looking for a long time. Yusuf, interested in the conversation, came closer and asked who exactly had been found. Mira, noticing his curiosity, explained that the witch in question had put a curse on the king. The adventurers continued to discuss the reward for catching the witch, and it turned out that whoever found her was promised a reward of 100 million liras. Yusuf, hearing this amount, could not contain his surprise. He opened his mouth, trying to realize what he had heard. Mira continued, telling him that many adventurers had been looking for the witch for a long time, but she had managed to avoid their traps, and no one had been able to catch her. Hearing this, Yusuf was embarrassed. He lowered his gaze slightly and tempered his fervor, adding discreetly that he was only a pastry chef and such a mission was clearly not for him. Merle struck a pompous pose and declared with determination that one day she would receive the award. Mira replied with a smile that the story had nothing to do with them, as they were doing a completely different job, slug fighting. Yusuf, listening to their conversation, added that a steady income was always best. Nothing in common, Yusuf thought at the time, but different things happen in life. whether it's a profession or the people around you. In the morning, just before the entrance to the dungeon, all the merchants had already taken their places, shouting excitedly about the opening and beckoning adventurers to their stalls. The atmosphere around was filled with the anticipation of a new day, full of hope and lively trade. Placing all the goods on the counter, Yusu greeted his first regular customers, Merle and Mira, with a smile. Merle, without wasting time, ordered 3 gummies at once, and Mira, after thinking about it a little longer, decided that she would take the largest candy that was available. Since the morning, Yusu had bought a towel for 500 liras. Now he had 420 liras left. In yen terms, that meant that he had exactly 420 yen on hand, because the exchange rate was 1-to-1. Yusu Yahagi, after his reincarnation, managed to realize his first important achievement, opening his own store. A lot of events had happened, unexpected and difficult, but despite everything, he was able to live to the second day in the new world, standing at the threshold of new opportunities with a slight excitement and a sense of the beginning of a real life. 2 girls, Merle and Mira, became his first regular clients, whom Yusu was surprised, but also happy, to find at the very beginning of his journey. In the bustle of the morning, when they approached his counter again, Mira suddenly asked a question, wondering if he was a magician. Yusu admitted with a slight smile that the only spell he was proficient in was discovery, a simple magic for opening a store. Mira sighed. Mira explained with a slight smile that the ability to use opening was a rare form of spatial magic. She added that not everyone is capable of controlling such powers, even if they seem simple at first glance. Merle happily interrupted her, exclaiming that she wanted something for 10 lire and as soon as possible. Her impatience and shining eyes brought a smile to her face, creating a lively, almost festive atmosphere around the shop. After a while, the girls noticed that Yusu looked tired and pale. His movements were slow, and his eyes were red from lack of sleep. He calmly explained that he hadn't slept well the night before, and with a strained smile, he handed Merle 3 chewing gums. Despite his fatigue, he tried to keep up the brand, taking care of his first and most loyal female customers. Merle ran briskly onward without losing energy, shouting goodbye to Yusuha that they would see each other again. Mira, more reserved, bowed quietly and promised that they would be back soon. Yusu, seeing them off with a glance, wished them to return alive, to which Merle looked back and shouted that it sounded too gloomy. Nevertheless, both girls left with smiles, and he remained at his counter, once again putting the sweets in order. Thanks to these girls, Yusu had even more regular customers. He greeted them all with a friendly smile, trying to memorize their faces and preferences. One of the adventurers approached the counter and asked if curried rice crackers were on sale. He explained that his companions would like to take such with them before going into the dungeon. After a while, however, Yusu realized that he wouldn't be able to make a quick buck on Dagashi. The morning's proceeds amounted to 360 liras. With that money, Yusu was able to spend the night in that cheap house. At the moment, he had 780 liras in his possession. Walking up to Badakuro's cheap house last night, Yusu realized that the place seemed very creepy in the dark. Would he even be able to leave there alive by morning? Once inside, Yusu saw a very angry and disgruntled woman at the front desk. He mentally compared her appearance to that of a boor. After informing her that he was going to stay with them for one night, he heard back that it would cost 850 liras, with breakfast included. The woman escorted him to his room and demanded that he be quiet at night or she would kick him out. Yusuha had no choice but to agree. The room was tiny, hardly larger than a pantry, but it contained the bare essentials, a narrow bed, an old bedside table, and a lamp gleaming dully on its surface. Though cramped, The room felt oddly cozy, almost homely. The woman, not hiding her irritation, tossed over her shoulder that the magic crystal in the lamp would only last for 2 hours, added that the checkout could be left unannounced, and slammed the door with demonstrative rudeness, as if sealing Yusu in this cubbyhole until morning. With this thought that in the morning all he would have to do was pack his things and leave in peace, Yusu was relieved to get into bed, allowing himself a faint smile. However, something wasn't right. The cold crept through the blanket, as if an icy hand was slowly squeezing his back. The room that had seemed cozy just a moment ago now felt like a frozen cave, and Yusu began to shiver, not understanding how it was even possible to sleep in such a place. Even under the blanket, Yusu could feel the draft and the piercing cold. It was early spring in Japan at this time, and it seemed like the weather was almost the same here. He tried to convince himself that it was still better than sleeping under the open sky. However, the thought kept him on his toes. What if this was the warm weather for this world? Perhaps winter here was a nightmare, and then sleeping in a place like this wasn't the worst thing in the world. He still hadn't slept well that morning, feeling more tired than the day before. His first thought was the realization that he needed to start saving money so that in the future he would have enough for a cabin, or at least a better place to really rest. Evening came, the time when adventurers begin to return from the dungeons. Yusu noticed his acquaintances, Mira and Merle, looking extremely tired and exhausted, as if they had spent the entire day in an unequal battle with the world itself. Yusuf looked at the girls anxiously and asked what was wrong. Mira exhaled tiredly and told him that Merle had fallen into an insidious trap in the dungeon, and that she herself had fallen under a curse that caused unrelenting dizziness. Their strength was running low, and returning was a real ordeal. Merle, breathing heavily, began to recount what had happened. Once in the dungeon, she had unwittingly touched the gargoyle statue. This turned out to be a fatal mistake. Although it wasn't fatal, the pain in her head was so intense that she could barely stand on her feet. Every movement only made it feel more like her mind was being torn apart. Yusuf looked at the girls with concern and asked if they had cups and water. Mira responded to his question with a smile, but her skeptical look said that she didn't quite believe in the help he was talking about. With some irony, she asked if he had an antidote. Yusuf replied with slight uncertainty that it wasn't exactly an antidote, but rather a juice. A grape-flavored powdered juice that cost 30 lira. He explained that its peculiarity was that once dissolved in 120 milliliters of water, it would begin to have a dissipating effect on whoever drank it, helping to relieve tension and ease headaches. After preparing the juice, Yusuf carefully handed the glass to Merle, who looked tired as she leaned against the wall behind his store. He gently helped her drink, holding the glass so that she could easily take a sip, hoping it would bring her some relief. The next moment Merle jumped up from her seat, her eyes sparkling and a smile spreading across her face. She explained how delicious it was and eagerly asked if he had more. Yusuf stepped closer, his gaze focused on Merle, who looked much better now. Her complexion had become warm and natural, and her expression had softened. He said with a slight sense of satisfaction that it was now definitely safe to say the girl was going to be fine. Merle, sensing his nearness, was a little confused, her cheeks flushed, and she looked away embarrassed. Mira suddenly appeared and noticed with interest that the effect was indeed impressive. She looked over the drink packages and curiously listed 5 different flavors: grape to dissipate, orange to detox, strawberry to reduce magical energy consumption, melon to increase experience for 40 minutes, and pineapple to increase profits for 15 minutes. Yusuf confirmed with a smile that each flavor did indeed have its own unique effect, surprising her as much as himself. The girls, not believing their ears, hurriedly picked out the juices that immediately caught their attention. Merle, with excitement in her eyes, grabbed all the pineapple ones, not doubting their usefulness. Mira, weighing her choices, decided to take 3 grape and 3 orange. In addition, Merle, as if surrendering to temptation, thought a dozen lottery tickets for candy bars would brighten her day. It was hard to believe that only a minute ago she'd been tormented by a curse. All the nearby adventurers soon began to hear Merle's loud exclamations. She had lost the lottery again. Some sighed and remarked with a chuckle that she was at it again. Everyone realized that Merle would not rest so easily. Some tried to talk her out of it, suggesting that she leave this obsession behind, but the girl responded by telling her to be quiet, and each time she firmly said, "One more." Yusu, watching this, began to wonder if she was getting too caught up in the whole thing. Merle screamed that she wanted to try it until she won. That's her style of fighting. It all happened out of the blue. Merle turned around at the sound, but before she could even blink an eye, someone exclaimed, "Hold on," and shoved something strange sharply into her mouth. She tried to recoil, but it was too late. With a shriek of what, Merle rounded her eyes, feeling the unknown substance instantly begin to dissolve on her tongue. She was tense at first, not realizing what had happened or what exactly had been slipped to her. After a while, however, realization came. She actually felt better. She wondered in surprise what it was. Yusu, trying to look nonchalant, replied that it was a cola with a calming effect to help put her thoughts in order and relieve stress. Mira, with a slight smile, suggested that she always keep a can of Coke with her for Merle, in case it made life easier. Yusu, taking advantage of the moment, reminded Merle that she still owed 40 lira. His sales had reached 3,000 lira all day, and that seemed like a real success to him. Today, Yusuha managed to stop at the same cheap house again. Inside, he was greeted with the usual question as to whether he was going to stay the night. He replied that he needed 1 room, and the woman behind the counter informed him that he would have the same one he had yesterday. Yusu noted to himself that the landlady was the same, with the same sullen expression and heavy gaze. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a dark spot on the counter and thought it was just dirt. However, the woman immediately caught his gaze and noticed that he was paying attention to the spot. She looked menacingly at Yusu and stated that it was just a fight. She added that she was quite capable of putting anyone in their place herself. Yusa choked on his fear at her dark look and cold words. The thought grew inside him that he needed to find a better place to sleep as soon as possible, where there would be no stains or intimidating old women. In the morning, Yusu woke up earlier than usual, deciding to take a seat closer to the entrance of the dungeon. He knew that the foot traffic was higher there, which meant he had a better chance of making a good profit. The only thought going through his mind was to earn a better night's lodging as quickly as possible, away from the gloomy landlady and the dirty marks of past fights. Yusa cast the opening spell and noticed with interest that the pineapple juice that had been quickly sold out yesterday was back in stock. The rest of the items that had been nearly sold out the day before were also in the same full supply. Yusu stared at the counters in amazement, trying to realize if they were really all recovering on their own. There were also new items on the counter, among which the disposable rocket was particularly notable. If you threw it at a monster, it would explode, and if you used several of them at once, the effect would be amplified. The lottery machine was also completely full again, as if nothing had ever disappeared. Yusu was shocked. The magic of the explosion. He remembered very well how in Japan, rockets simply clapped and made a loud sound, causing only surprise or joy. But here, it was a real weapon. He wasn't sure if such a dangerous commodity was appropriate for a candy shop. While he was pondering, Merle and Mira were already approaching the counter. Merle was thrilled to see the pineapple juice back on sale and, as usual, was ready to buy up the entire stock. But then her eyes caught on a new item in Yusu's hands. Yusu decided to check with Mira about how dangerous explosion magic could be. The girl calmly replied that it all depended on the caster himself. In skillful hands, it is indeed a very effective tool in battle. She also added that she couldn't use it herself. Yusu hesitated, for he didn't fully understand how it all worked. He turned to Merle, suggesting that she test the new product. She thought for a moment, then hesitantly said that she would only take the juice, but that she might risk buying a test batch for herself. He packed 3 third-class small missiles for the girl, and said with a slight smile that he thought they would definitely enjoy it. However, after seeing them off with a glance, Yusu still warned them to be careful when using them. The girls just waved their hands and confidently replied that he was worried for nothing, as they dealt with magic items all the time and knew how to handle them. In the evening of the same day, the girls were returning to the city, and the first thing they did was head to Yahagi's candy shop. Yusu was somewhat surprised by Merle's assertiveness. She jumped at him from the get-go, shouting happily that the pineapple juice was amazing, and that she and Mira had made a lot more than usual. Both girls looked tired, but their satisfied faces said that the day had brought them many good times. They began to share their experiences, and Merle excitedly told how the rockets had simply shocked her. The monster, which was far from weak, had been blown away with one hit, and she couldn't hide her admiration. Merle now wanted to try rockets too. These devices could be used by anyone. They were as powerful as magic used by skilled adventurers, yet simple and practical. Yusu thought about it. This was the perfect item for beginners after all, and it all only cost 50 liras. Merle decided to try her luck at the daily lottery again. This time she won only 5 liras, but it was just another step on her way to the prize. She enthusiastically declared that she would not stop until she won, as it had become not just a hobby but a lifestyle. Her friends, watching her excitement, began to serve her cans of Coke, hoping that the drink would cool her down a bit and help her calm down. And so, Yusuf found himself back in that dreadful house to rent a room. The old woman greeted him sullenly, not hiding her irritation. He was going to stay for one night as before, even though he knew it wasn't the best option for a vacation. The reason he was back in this cheap place was not so much to save money, but rather to realize that despite the increase in sales, he still needed to be careful with his spending. The old woman then offered to let him rent 5 nights at once, promising him a discount on his stay. It seemed to Yasuo that she had become a little kinder, but despite that, he couldn't agree. He was still planning to find something better, and 5 nights in a row in this place was clearly not to his liking. However, the old woman was not upset and continued to warn Yusu that there was a rather dangerous person staying near his room today. She advised him to be careful, as this person could be a threat. Yusu wondered, after all, such warnings didn't sound like mere coincidence. Yusu decided to ask if the person he was being told about was a bandit. The old woman replied that it was not. The old woman continued that the man's name was the Grim Priest, and there were rumors that he had killed many people. Yasuo felt uneasy, even just hearing about it. His imagination was already painting pictures in his mind of the dark deeds associated with this man. He hoped that his paths would not cross with this creepy type. Yusu, tormented by curiosity, asked why the guards would not arrest such a dangerous man. The old woman squinted in surprise and asked if he really didn't know. When she was convinced of his ignorance, she told him to wait, explaining that it was a long story and tea needed to be brewed for it. The young man reluctantly nodded, and while the hostess went to the kitchen, the thought flashed through his mind that maybe, in fact, this stern woman was just lonely. Yusu decided that since the old woman was going to make tea, it would be polite to offer something sweet to go with it. He pulled out a package of chocolate dorayaki from his shop. There were 2 of each, and according to their magical property, the second dorayaki should be shared with the person next to him. It symbolized the strengthening of friendship and trust. Yusuf hesitated whether to get closer to this stern woman. His experience told him that the effects of dagashi usually corresponded to their price, so excessive closeness was not to be expected. However, he decided that even with such a formidable old woman, it was possible to try to connect. With these thoughts in mind, he placed the package on the table. He opened the package when the old woman returned and offered one of the dagashi to her. He said it was a candy he was selling. She took one from his hands and tasted it. She said it was delicious and asked if he sold them. The old woman looked at the packaging with interest and asked him what price he was selling the sweets for. When she heard how cheap they were, she snorted and said she would take 10 of them at once. Yusuf was slightly dumbfounded. Oddly enough, even this awkward conversation turned into another sale. Taking the mug, Yusuf thought that this tea looked like something between hojicha and black tea. He decided to bring the conversation back to where they had left off earlier. Why aren't the authorities working against criminals? The old woman began her story, looking away. She said that all the best generals and warriors had been sent to the border. What was left in the capital was a pitiful remnant of forces, unable to defend even themselves. Yusuf, however, couldn't help but notice how much pleasure she was taking in eating the dorayaki. He felt a little uneasy at this rate, he thought. They might be closer than he would like. I should probably cut down on the sweets a little less. The old woman told Yusuha with a heavy sigh that the country had been at war for a long time. All the best generals and warriors had been sent to the border, and what was left could hardly be called a full army. Yusuf struggled to remain calm. He really didn't know about this. After all, his stay in this world was just beginning. The old woman also mentioned the royal curse, and Yusuf immediately remembered Mira and Merle talking about the witch's curse earlier. It seemed to be the same thing. The king had once had a bride, a powerful and illustrious witch named Michelle. Their union was considered a great union of power and wisdom, but suddenly the engagement was broken off. Yusuf couldn't understand how this could have happened, and questions swarmed in his mind. It turned out that the reason for the breakup was simple. The king had fallen in love with another woman, the one who now held the title of queen. For Yusuf, it was a real shock. He expected intrigue, dark magic, or political games, but got a story of human weakness and fickleness of heart. Such a twist seemed far more painful and cruel to him than any spell. The queen possessed a mesmerizing beauty, and according to the old woman, it was her charm that caused the king to lose his head. She dismissed the story with disdain, calling the king a typical man who succumbed to appearances. Yusuf assumed that the witch, abandoned and humiliated, had cast the curse in revenge, and the old woman confirmed with a sour grin that that was when it all began. Ever since the king's departure from the affairs of state, the city's guard has been weakened, and security has been in decline. The guards no longer risk dealing with dangerous criminals, as rumors alone no longer frighten them. Yusuf thought that if the king was ever going to marry her, Michelle must have been not only a powerful witch, but also quite pretty. Suddenly there was a heavy, almost palpable energy from the stairwell, as if someone invisible had descended the stairs, leaving a trail of cold and tension behind them. Yusuf shuddered. He could feel someone's presence in the air, alien, dark, and restless. The old woman frowned sharply. Her eyes narrowed, and she cast an anxious glance toward the stairs. In a subdued voice, she cautioned Yusuf, such words, no joke. Criminals might be released, but to sass against the royal family was like signing one's own sentence. You could go to jail for that kind of stubbornness, and no amount of connections would save you. Yusuf thought he sensed a presence behind him on the stairs and turned around, but there was no one behind him. Yusuf hurriedly turned to the old woman. confusedly explaining that he had heard a strange sound from the stairs, as if someone was eavesdropping on them. He looked around the room nervously, unable to find his bearings. The old woman squinted at him, looking at him carefully, and wondered with a slight sneer if he was even listening to her story, or if he was already starting to see shadows out of fear. The old woman sighed and, as if summarizing their conversation, said that she didn't care who her guests were, as long as they paid on time. But Yasuo, she said, should keep her eyes open, for the neighbor, the gloomy priest, could be not only strange, but dangerous. It was a deep, almost silent night. Yusuf lay on the creaky bed, tossing and turning under the thin blanket. His thoughts were restless, every rustle behind the wall, every creak of the floor seemed ominous to him. He realized with annoyance that he would not be able to sleep tonight. Yusuf sat up in bed, his heart beating faster than usual. He felt as if he was being watched from the darkness. Thoughts of the gloomy priest, who was staying in the next room, swirled restlessly in his mind. What if the man really did decide he was dangerous? In this world, where accusations could be spoken in whispers, and judgment carried out in the shadows, someone like him could easily seem suspicious. The wall separating him and the would-be assassin seemed frighteningly thin. And as if in mockery of his fears, Yusuf suddenly felt an unbearable urge to go to the bathroom. He gritted his teeth as he stared at the ceiling, cursing his body for such an inopportune moment. However, the restroom was in the courtyard, and the stairs right across from the gloomy priest's room. Yusuf sat on the bed, staring into the darkness, pondering what would finish him off faster, fear or need. He could feel the tragicomedy thickening over him, not even a magical explosion, but a banal desire to go to the bathroom could be the cause of his demise. But then something clicked in him. If he was to die, he should die not as a pathetic shadow, but with dignity. Stepping out into the dimly lit corridor, Yusuf immediately noticed the door to the next room, where the gloomy priest resided, was ajar. His heart thudded in his chest like a drum of alarm. He froze in place, tensing his whole body. Had that most dangerous neighbor already awakened? A dangerous thought crept into Yusuf's head, to peek through the ajar door and find out what was going on in the gloomy priest's room. He was well aware that curiosity could turn to disaster, but it was impossible to restrain himself. Something about this forbidden moment tugged at him more than common sense. What he saw, however, was not what he had expected. On the neatly made bed in the next room lay a set of exquisite lingerie. Yusuf stood frozen, unable to look away from an object that didn't fit his idea of a gloomy priest. The first thing that flashed through his mind was that the bra was clearly not a small size. Yusuf shook his head, trying to push away the strange thoughts that were popping into his head. He forced himself not to think about the underwear that happened to catch his eye in the next room. His mind tried to find an explanation, as if the man was an underwear designer or had a strange hobby. But the more he thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. His mind kept spinning with the idea that there was something more behind all of this, something dark and dangerous. Yusuf took a deep breath and decided it would be best to just ignore what he had just seen. Yusuf finally made his way outside and headed towards the restroom with relief. The situation with the night's tension appeared to be resolved, and after doing what he needed to do, he felt the tension leave him. After everything that had happened in one night, Yusuf felt the need to regain his composure at least a little bit. Going outside, he went outside to relieve himself, and as he walked back to his room, he realized that his stomach was now clearly demanding attention. Opening the package of dorayaki, he gladly took one, feeling the soft and warm bean paste cake give him a brief respite. Yusuf had just begun to savor the chocolate dorayaki, feeling the sweet paste melt in his mouth, when suddenly an unpleasant, harsh voice caught his attention. In front of Yusuf stood a figure towering over him, hidden in the darkness. The man wore heavy armor that reflected the dim light from the window, creating an intimidating sheen. His silhouette was massive and menacing, each step echoing with a thud, as if metal was scraping against stone. His face was hidden by a mask, but his eyes, those brightly glowing eyes, cold as ice, left no doubt that there was more than a man standing before him. He was sure that he was facing death with a scythe. Yusuf started to explain that he was just a street vendor, but his words were interrupted when the armored figure in front of him noticed the sweets. Still in a daze of fear, Yusuf held out one dorayaki with a trembling hand to the man in armor standing in front of him. He felt his heart clench with terror, for it wasn't every day you offered a sweet to someone who looked like the embodiment of death itself. The idea that he was sharing a candy with a possible god of death right now seemed both absurd and frighteningly real. On the other hand, he could have been an ordinary person. Yusuf tried to convince himself that behind the menacing appearance was someone who just looked scary. Perhaps this person wouldn't kill him just because of one dorayaki. Suddenly, a thin, tinkling and clearly female voice was heard from under the heavy mask, saying with unexpected warmth that it was delicious. He was almost certain that he had just heard a female voice coming from under the helmet. Hearing the question of whether everything on the counter was sweets, Yusuf nodded. The knight slowly looked through the assortment and calmly pointed out a few treats, clearly showing interest. After picking up an armful of sweets and holding them in his two hands with difficulty, the knight asked Yusuf if he liked sweets and replied that no, he didn't like sweets. Having made a sale of 1,000 lire, Yusuf heard a question as to whether he lived in this inn. He answered honestly that he stayed here from time to time. The knight briefly said goodbye, and Yusuf, feeling relieved, thought it was time to return to his room. He was glad that everything had worked out, and that it was possible to finalize the deal. The girl, once in her room, sat alone, going through the sweets she had bought with a smile on her face. She couldn't help but feel satisfied that she had finally decided to talk to Yusuf. There was a slight joy in her eyes at the simple companionship that gave her a sense of solitary tranquility after a long day. She didn't know if what had happened was fate, but she was pleased with the outcome. Yusuf lay under the blanket in his room, shivering with excitement. Thoughts of how to stay alive never left him, and every shadow in the corner seemed like a threat. He knew he had to survive. Morning had come again, and Yusuf was opening his candy shop as usual. Today, however, his gaze was immediately caught by an oddity. His store had changed. He looked around with wonder and came to a conclusion. The shop seemed to change according to success. The more sales, the better it became. Yusuf could now proudly arrange his goods in neat wooden crates, giving the shop a more organized and attractive look. On top of that, he noticed that the assortment had expanded. There were new sweets, drinks, and even a couple rare treats that weren't available before. On sale at Yusuf's was now low-salt chips. Each packet contained a magic card with a picture of a monster that could be used to temporarily summon that creature to one side. Such cards were especially useful in battle or when performing dangerous tasks. Of particular interest was the fact that each buyer had a small but real chance to get a rare SSS rank monster summoning card. As always, Merle and Mira were among the first to approach the shop. Their gazes instantly stopped on the novelties neatly laid out in the new wooden crates. With a slight smile, Yusuf introduced them to the fresh merchandise, weekly salted chips with monster cards. Before he could finish his explanation, the girls explained in unison that they would definitely try them. One of the cards Mira came across was an R-rank stone golem, a massive creature that was a reanimated statue of gray-brown stone. Its height reached 2.5 meters, and every muscle seemed to be chiseled from a solid block. Despite its low rank, the golem inspired respect. Mira glowed with joy. The stone golem was a great find. Its versatility allowed it to be used both as a human shield in defense and a powerful moving force in offense. She was already making plans on where and how she could try it out. Yusu, giving in to curiosity, glanced at the card Merle had gotten. The one with the pouch showed the result, plain slime. Merle rolled her eyes and sighed brokenly. Her luck had failed once again. Yusu, struck by the thought, approached Mira with an offer of a part-time job. He held out to her one of his new products, an apricot stick. It was a simple but unusual product. Thin slices of apricot, frozen in sweet syrup, encased in a transparent bag shaped like a popsicle. In addition to its refreshing flavor, the stick had a magical effect. It gave a temporary burst of courage to whoever ate it. He asked Mira to use her ice magic to instantly freeze the contents. Mira, slightly embarrassed, apologized to Yusu. It turned out that she didn't have ice magic. Yusu nodded understandingly, though to himself he was a little upset. He was sure that if the wand had frozen instantly, it would have tasted like real fruit sherbet. His thoughts were interrupted by a familiar, ominous voice behind him. It was muffled, as if coming from beneath a mask, and it had the same cold, almost dead calmness that Yusu had heard last night. Turning around, he saw a tall knight in black armor, the same one who had bought 1,000 lire worth of sweets the day before. Yusu hadn't expected to see a knight in black armor here, and he instantly tensed up. He instinctively stood in front of Merle and Mira, shading them as if he feared that the mysterious stranger might be a threat. However, trying not to give away his anxiety, he gave a strained smile and politely greeted the new customer. The knight, as if not noticing the wariness, calmly asked what kind of help was needed using ice magic. Yusu tried to falter, waved his hand, and said that it wasn't important and that he wouldn't have anything to pay for such a service anyway. However, the knight shook his head and confidently said that he didn't need money. The next moment, he raised his hand without further ado, and a soft wave of cold air traveled across the counter. The apricot sticks were instantly covered in a thin layer of frosting, freezing perfectly chilled. Yusu felt relieved as he watched the knight use ice magic to freeze the apricot sticks. He began to think that perhaps this man wasn't as scary at all as he had previously thought. The knight was reserved, but he didn't seem to have any intentions of threatening or attacking. Yusu dared to offer him one of the frozen wands, hoping it would help build some trust. Yusu noticed the knight heading resolutely towards the counter to buy 10 apricot sticks. This was a surprise to him, as Yusu had not expected such interest from this mysterious man. Even though the knight was honest about his purchases, and his manner of speaking was clear and direct, an intimidating aura hovered around him, making everyone else feel uncomfortable. When the knight left the shop, Yusu couldn't help his curiosity and decided to wonder if what was being said about him was true. He posed the question to his friends, hoping to get some sort of explanation. Merle told him that she herself had seen the man kill people from her group. Mira, who always tried to be calm, added that she had heard of a knight who had managed to put down 10 men at once, and it had left a deep impression on her. Merle continued the story, clarifying that the knight was not only a master of the sword, but also capable of incredible feats. She recalled how he had once cut a 2-meter snake into pieces with a single blow, leaving all the witnesses in complete amazement. However, she added that his prowess was not limited to physical strength. He also used second-order magic. This was a particularly amazing sight, as magic of this level was considered extremely rare and difficult to master. Yusu couldn't help but say out loud that he didn't understand what such a strong and capable person was doing in such a weak dungeon. This surprised Merle, and Mira was silent for a bit, as if pondering his words. Eventually Merle and Mira hurriedly left, the heavy, ominous aura left by the knight's visit weighing down even on them. Yusu remained at the bench, slightly confused. He hadn't thought that the Grim Reaper would actually show up here, much less become a regular customer. That evening, the apricot sticks melted, and Yusuf sighed, deciding not to be disappointed at this time. But there were hardly any customers, so he didn't have much to lose. Suddenly, Michelle walked up to the shop and asked Yusuf for another rocket with a slight smile. Looking around, she noticed that there weren't many customers today and explained that a witch had been seen nearby, which was why people were wary of leaving the house. She also announced that she had won the third prize in his store, to which Yusuf congratulated her sincerely, happy that his store was not only profitable but also a joy to those around him. With a smile on her face, Michelle inquired about getting the monster chips she had spotted at Merle's today. Yusuf, without wasting any time, pulled out a new box of lightly salted chips from under the counter, just the ones that contained the collectible monster cards. Eventually, Yusuf realized that he was getting all of his goods for free, so he didn't even have to think about purchasing or expenses. Even so, selling sweets was a bit tedious, especially with all the strange customers that stopped by his shop. He wasn't discouraged though. If sales continued to grow at the same rate, he would be able to afford to spend the night in a much more comfortable and safe place by this week. Suddenly, a grim priest appeared outside the candy shop. Yusuf greeted him in awe. The grim priest was surprised at the way Yusuf called him and started to introduce himself. However, he stammered. Eventually, the gloomy priest did give his name, Manurva. He then silently pointed to a bottle of orange juice on the counter, making it clear that it was the one he wanted to buy. Yusuf worriedly wondered if his customer had poisoned himself, because his voice sounded strange. A picture immediately appeared in his mind. A face covered with deep scars, hidden under a hood. Not wanting to ask any more questions, he silently poured the orange juice powder into a mug and carefully served the drink to his gloomy customer. Manurva lifted his mask, revealing only part of his face, and carefully took a few sips of orange juice. Yusuf, watching him tensely, wondered if the drink was helping, and heard a low-key confirmation in response. However, the voice sounded a little higher than before, which did not escape his attention. Without waiting for more questions, the gloomy priest briefly assured him not to worry about him, and added that he would be back. With these words, he left leisurely. After Manurva left, Yusuf wondered if Manurva sounded like a woman's name. He couldn't say for sure how unusual that was for this world, or if it was even worth asking such questions. His thoughts were interrupted when his gaze locked onto a new item that had suddenly appeared on the counter. Yusuf scrutinized the new item, a stretch card. It represented something unusual, as it gave access to one of the attributes of statistics depending on a random set on the card. But the most interesting feature was that the card had an expiration date of only 12 hours, which added an element of urgency and excitement. As an additional bonus, the purchase included chewing gum, which made the product even more attractive to customers. Yusuf was sure that the new merchandise would especially appeal to adventurous gamblers who liked risk and surprises. He remembered with a slight nostalgia the Japan where he had once lived. It was always full of such fun and excitement-inducing trivia. While he was pondering, a new customer approached his pastry shop. It was Garm, a young adventurer well known in the neighborhood. He had come for his favorite curried rice balls. Garm was a regular customer and had helped advertise his establishment to other adventurers on more than one occasion. Yusuf regarded him with warmth, thinking him a good, reliable guy who was a pleasure to do business with. Garm introduced his new teammate, a young adventurer named Regal. In response, Yusuf good-naturedly remarked that he hoped he could find something to his liking. Regal, a little embarrassed, confessed that he was a newcomer, but had heard that this pastry shop offered many useful items for only 10 lira. Yusuf enthusiastically showed off the selection. His store was indeed a great place for beginners to stock up inexpensively on things that while simple, could sometimes save a life. Merle's eyes immediately lit up with joy when she came into the shop this morning, delighted by the rapidly expanding selection of sweets. The counters were becoming more diverse every day, and it seemed that anything from useful little things to truly rare finds could now be found in this candy shop. Yusu began to enthusiastically introduce a new item, stretch cards. He explained that to participate, you had to wipe off the protective layer with a coin and see the result. If 3 identical symbols matched, it was a win. The concept immediately appealed to many customers, especially those who don't mind trying their luck. Merle, known for her gambling proclivity, immediately volunteered to be the first to try it. On Yusu's advice, she drank a can of Coke first. And so, the few adventurers who dared to try their luck with the stretch cards froze in suspense when they saw the same images on the first 2 sectors. It was only a matter of erasing the last section, and the chance of getting a bonus became almost tangible. Excited anticipation hung in the air, and the crowd gathered closer, watching every movement of the coin. However, Yusu, standing behind the counter with his usual half-smile, knew that matching 2 symbols was far from a guarantee of winning. It was the kind of calculation often used in marketing, to create a sense of near victory to fuel excitement. Suddenly, one of the adventurers, having erased the last part of his stretch card, froze in place before his eyes flashed a bright glow. All 3 sectors of the card appeared to have the same symbols. The light burst out of the paper, illuminating the surroundings and eliciting surprised exclamations from those gathered. The adventurer, still stunned by what was happening, clenched his fist in admiration and reported that he could already feel his body filling with power. Yusu, remaining collected, reminded him that the amplification effect only lasted for 12 hours, and if he wanted to make the most of it, he should hurry to the dungeon while the power was still with him. Yusu walked over to Merle, who was looking at her stretch card with a frustrated look. Her result was far from expected: 3 different pictures, not the slightest chance of reinforcement. Merle mumbled dejectedly that it looked like she was out of luck again, and called herself a loser. Yusu, noticing her disappointment, tried to cheer her up. Merle reached for another batch of stretch cards in a real gusto, not wanting to give up so easily. Yusu wished her luck with a slight chuckle and a skeptical expression, not really believing in her chances, but not hindering her endeavors. Mira, watching her friend, sighed and handed her a bottle of Coke. Merle suddenly said that the rumors of a witch in the lower floors of the dungeon didn't seem to be fiction at all. She was getting more and more anxious to strengthen her abilities before going down there. Mira nodded with a worried expression on her face, confirming that at their current level they were unlikely to be able to handle such a threat. Yusa listened to their conversation in surprise, only now realizing that the witch had indeed appeared in the dungeon, and this news came as a complete surprise to him. Yusa, having heard about the place where the witch had been spotted, couldn't help but be interested. Merle and Mira said that she had been seen on the 3rd level of the dungeon, where she had shot a poison arrow at several adventurers, but had escaped afterward. Yusu thought about what they said, trying to gauge how old this story was, and when exactly the attack happened. Yusa asked Merle and Mira if they knew what the witch looked like. Merle and Mira nodded and explained that her portraits were posted in front of the castle, so it wasn't hard to recognize her. Moreover, there is a special insect in the dungeon that looks like a mosquito and makes a piercing sound when the witch is nearby. At this moment, an excited crowd ran up to the candy shop. People were excitedly discussing stretch cards and cola candy, shouting and asking if it was true that this was where Garm made his purchases. Yusuf couldn't hold back a smile. Another wave of customers thanks to Garm had filled his shop with life, and he felt his business was really growing. Selling goods one by one, Yusuf felt confident that very soon he would be able to live entirely off the profits of his candy shop. the flow of customers due to the popularity of the new products, and good reviews only reinforced this thought. He mentally estimated that if things continued to go on like this, he would be able to afford to walk to the market after the morning rush and buy everything he needed. Yusa ended up purchasing a roomy leather backpack that adventurers usually used. He realized that he wouldn't always be able to keep the store open, so he had to be prepared for any situation. He put the bare necessities in the backpack, a cheap but warm blanket he'd bought at a thrift store, because the nights in Badakuro could be really cold. After that, he allowed himself a little comfort, spending 150 lire on hot vegetable soup and 350 on a large, flavorful sausage. Now that Yusu had a little more money in his pocket, he could finally afford everything he needed and have a proper breakfast. He had already spent most of the money for this day on the backpack, but he still had 3,000 liras in reserve, enough to feel confident and not worry about the little things. In the evening, Yusu's walk dragged on, and he found himself in the square in front of the royal palace. Spacious and well-kept, it was noticeably different from the noisy square in front of the dungeon. Here it was cleaner, brighter and quieter. Yusu looked around for the bulletin board, and after walking along a row of neat lanterns and stone benches, he finally spotted it at the back of the square, near a massive stone wall. When Yusu saw the advertisement for the hunted witch, he noted to himself that she didn't look threatening at all, but rather cute. At that moment, a familiar menacing voice sounded behind him, asking him directly if he really thought so. Without waiting for an answer, the grim priest immediately asked the next question, what Yusu was doing near the bulletin board. He explained that his acquaintances were discussing a witch today, and he was curious as to what she looked like. Yusu noted to himself that the grim priest with the name Manurva didn't really look as intimidating as he had first thought. However, when the latter asked if he was afraid of the witch, Yusu, who called himself an ordinary merchant, suddenly felt a chill of fear again and realized how formidable his interlocutor actually remained. Yusu added that although his opinion didn't matter, he still felt sorry for the witch. Just as suddenly, his interlocutor's eyes flashed with a frightening light, and Yusuf couldn't realize if he had said something dangerous despite all the warnings. The gloomy priest looked at Yusuf with such severity that a chill ran down Yusuf's spine. The gloomy priest, with an unexpected vigor in his voice, clarified if Yusuf was good, which made him slightly confused. He wasn't sure how to answer that question, especially since the wording sounded so strange in the context of what was going on. Yusuf awkwardly replied that he thought he was a good man, and that if he met a witch up close, maybe she wouldn't be as scary as they said. The gloomy priest objected, reminding him that everyone else said otherwise, and that Yusuf himself had probably heard such horrors as well. Yusuf felt his interlocutor begin to act a little strange, but despite that, he was sure that the situation was clearly better now than it had been before. Yusuf, noticing that the atmosphere was getting a bit tense, decided to defuse the situation. He pulled Carol's chocolate out of his backpack, a sweet known for making people happy. He offered it to the gloomy priest, hoping it would at least ease the situation a little. Chocolate was known for its special powers. Even the gloomiest person could feel their mood improve when they ate it. He wondered why the witch was so disliked, and was told that people usually preferred the more cheerful and pretty girls. But in Yusuf's opinion, the witch was quite pretty. She just looked tired, which he said out loud. The gloomy priest continued his questions, clarifying if he liked the witch. After all, she is, in his opinion, pretty and tall. Yusuf, a little embarrassed, added that if she also smelled good, it would only improve the impression. But he wondered to himself why he was having such a strange conversation with a gloomy priest. Yusuf wondered if the gloomy priest had ever met witches, and he replied briefly that he had long ago. Yusuf then asked if he liked them, to which the gloomy priest replied that he thought they were dangerous. The gloomy priest remarked that the dessert Yusu had treated him to turn out to be strawberry. Yusu enthusiastically told him that there were 4 flavors in total: strawberry, caramel, milk, and pistachio. Manurva immediately wanted to buy all the variants, and the conversation suddenly turned to active sales. Then, as if in between, he decided to ask Yusu for a name. Yusu said his name with a smile, addressing Manurva. Yusu wasn't sure if the chocolate had played a role, but communication became noticeably easier and conversations much more frank. It even seemed to him that Manurva's outward gloominess hid a rather plain person with ordinary foibles. He teased with a smile that he was glad to buy such things, but too much sweet stuff was bad for both his health and his wallet. Manurva, on the other hand, didn't hesitate to admit that he simply adores sweets and can't stop. Manurva replied by asking what Yusuha liked to eat. Manurva thought for a moment and admitted that he didn't have a strong preference. He ate almost everything. However, when he thought about it, he probably liked chicken and fruit the most. But suddenly Manurva, as if remembering something, turned the conversation back to the topic of the witch, as if this issue was more important to him than food. Manurva went back to his previous question and looked at him intently, and asked if Yusu really thought the witch was cute. The man was a little confused. He thought it was strange how insistent the gloomy priest was about his opinion. Sighing, Yusu said that it was all a matter of taste, and to truly understand a person, one must first get to know them personally. Yusu returned to the dungeon and was amazed at the number of people gathered. Clearly something unusual had happened. There was a shout in the crowd, calling for the road to be made way because one of the adventurers had badly injured his leg. Concerned voices calling for a healer followed. The atmosphere at the entrance to the dungeon became noticeably more heated. Yusu was surprised to recognize the injured young adventurer as Rugal, the newcomer he had met with Garm that morning. He was lying on a stretcher, pale and writhing in pain. The cries of panic continued, someone in the crowd shouting that the boy was bleeding badly, and they might not be able to get him to the hospital in time. Yusuf looked around his supplies in confusion. There wasn't a single healing potion among the goods. He was frantically going over in his head which of his goodies might help at least a little. Suddenly, Manurva appeared in the crowd. Seeing him, Yusuf rushed toward him in a panic and, panting, asked if he had any bandages. Receiving a negative answer, he felt disappointed. Hope was slipping away again. But before Yusuf could say anything, Manurva calmly stated that he knew how to heal wounds. It sounded unexpected and almost unrealistic. Manurva slowly raised his hand and, quietly reciting an incantation, compressed the air around Rugal's wound. Instantly, the bleeding stopped and the skin on his leg began to heal, leaving only a slight scar. Yusuf watched this with his mouth open. He had never seen healing magic live before. It was so impressive and amazing that he forgot about time and his excitement for a moment, which he remembered to tell Manurva immediately. Rugal thanked Manurva for saving him, but despite the healing, Yusuf continued to wonder what had happened in the dungeon. His interest was piqued by the fact that even seasoned adventurers could get into trouble. He wondered how much more dangerous the dungeon had become and what forces lurked there that even strong groups couldn't always handle. Even in the morning, Yusuf couldn't get rid of his thoughts of the dungeon. It was obvious to him that it was an extremely dangerous place, and it was hard for him to understand how Merle and Mira could risk their lives every day by visiting it. A few days later, Merle was excitedly looking at the Ghost Knight card she had finally managed to get. It was an R-class card, and while it was nothing special for most adventurers, it was a great fortune for Merle. Merle announced with shining eyes that today was one of the happiest days of her life. She wanted so badly to activate her Ghost Knight card right now, but she was well aware that there was no rush. She proudly announced that this card would become her talisman, a symbol of good luck in her future adventures. At the same time, Yusuf, watching her, couldn't help but think that while this was a day of good luck for Merle, it was a real setback for him himself. Yusuf felt that this day had been a failure from the start. While Merle was happy to receive a rare Ghost Knight card and call it her talisman, Yusuf's candy shop was doing worse than ever. He was struggling to sell his goods. Someone chopped up the display case, damaging the counter, and later he also gave the customer too much change. It all happened in one day, and it seemed like the trouble just followed one after another. He didn't know when it would end. Overjoyed at her good luck with the card, Merle decided that she should definitely try the chocolate lottery. Yusuf watched her in amazement, amazed at her perseverance and endless optimism. Despite all her failures in the past, she never gave up. Just as suddenly, Yusuf noticed the guards approaching. His heart skipped a beat. Had someone denounced him for those words about the witch? He remembered calling her cute, and now he didn't know if that was considered something reprehensible here. They announced for everyone to get their license plates ready, and now there would be a license check. Yusuf didn't have a license to trade, and as the guards got closer, he realized what was up. He was shocked. He had never imagined that in this world a license was required to sell goods. All this time, he had been doing business without even realizing he was breaking the law. Yusuf realized that things were bad. He felt his heart pounding in his throat and didn't know what to do, pretend everything was fine or shout shut and try to escape. However, Yusuf didn't want to do anything illegal in front of his regular customers, especially Merle, who was looking at her new card with delight. While he was floundering in his thoughts, the guards had already approached his counter and coldly demanded to see the trademark. Yusuf lowered his gaze and admitted that he didn't have a trademark and apologized. The guards sternly demanded that Yusuf tell them how long he had been trading in this place, and feeling himself getting more embarrassed by the second, he quietly replied that he had been doing it for about 8 days. Mira and Merle looked at what was happening with a surprised look. Yusuf was announced that he might be sent to jail. Fortunately for Yusuf, for his honesty and willingness to cooperate, the guards decided to limit it to a fine. He was sternly, but without hostility, advised to get a trade license as soon as possible to avoid future problems. Especially if Yusuf really planned to continue doing business in this city, the guards added. Yusuf compliantly agreed. Feeling both relieved and anxious at the same time, he still had a lot to learn about this world and its rules. Merle was confused, not understanding how Yusuf could be so naive, doing business without a license. Yusuf tried to explain himself, explaining that he had only recently arrived in the city and was not yet aware of all the local regulations. When asked where he had lived before, he mentioned Japan, but then was told that he had never heard of such a country in this world. Merle couldn't understand how Yusuf, who seemed so serious, could do such stupid things. Mira, however, called his actions cute, which completely surprised Merle. She hadn't expected to hear that from her friend, especially in a situation like this. Merle thought that Mira definitely had some talent for bringing up useless men. She couldn't understand how Mira could take all the ridiculous things Yusuf was doing with such calmness. Yusuf cautiously asked how much the license cost, hoping that the amount wouldn't be too much, since he didn't have much money left after the fine. Mira, hesitating, replied that, if she remembered correctly, a trading license cost about 12,000 lira. Hearing that amount, Yusuf felt his heart clench. For 1,000, that was hardly his entire balance, and the amount he needed was still so far away. Anxious thoughts flashed through his mind as to how he could get out of this situation. Yusuf thought about the fact that he still had money left for a night's lodging, but if he couldn't continue his business, it would be extremely hard for him to survive in this city. Panic began to creep up when Merle interrupted his musings, smiling and saying that he was lucky, for she was kind. Yusuf looked at her perplexed, not sure what she meant. She told him that there was one place in town where you could run your business without a license. Yusuf was all excited. Merle explained that there was one secret place in the city where you could do business without a license, but with certain conditions. Yusuf was surprised, not expecting this turn of events, and out of joy he almost couldn't believe that his problems could be solved. Yusuf found it hard to believe what Merle was telling him. After all, he had just received a fine himself. However, she confidently explained that it was probably happening underground. At first, the meaning of her words didn't reach Yusuf, but when it finally did, panic gripped him. Yusuf, not believing his ears, hurriedly clarified if this meant that she was suggesting that he do his trading in the underground. Merle replied with curiosity and a slight smile that that was exactly what she meant, as if it was the obvious and easiest solution. Yusuf was plagued by doubt. Would he even be able to get into the dungeon? His thoughts were confused, and an inner voice kept telling him that it was too risky. The girl stood at the counter, humming softly, absorbed in cooking. Her long, flowing hair fell down her back, adding lightness and grace to her image. Finally, her labor was complete. On the counter in front of her stood 3 appetizing sandwiches, neatly folded and decorated, and next to them, exquisite desserts. She carefully packed the food into a box. Then, quietly and confidently, she slipped her secret boots onto her feet, unusual but comfortable shoes that slightly increased her height, giving her even more confidence. She slipped a dark cape over her shoulders with an off-white fur collar. The fur was soft and fluffy, contrasting with her clothes and giving the look a special elegance. Manurva, the mysterious figure hidden beneath the mask, put it on, adjusted her clothes, and walked outside, still in high spirits, humming a tune as if her whole life was in her hands. Yusuf often referred to her as the gloomy priest, and though her image seemed mysterious, today she was full of lightness. However, her cheerful mood was interrupted by an unexpected encounter. She crashed into someone without noticing in her path. Her face was hidden under a mask, from under which only her eyes could be seen, their gaze so menacingly penetrating that it seemed to freeze everything around her. The adventurer who had crashed into her earlier couldn't stand it and, frightened, hurriedly ran away while screaming loudly. Even though Manurva was about to apologize, she didn't have time to utter a single word. Everything happened too fast. Early in the morning, near the entrance of the dungeon, Merle and Mira met and greeted each other with smiles. However, Yusuf, who had come so early, was clearly nervous. He admitted that the reason for his excitement was his first trip to the dungeon. Fear and uncertainty encompassed him despite the friendly surroundings. Merle supported him with a smile, saying that he wasn't going to go down into the depths to fight the witch, and that she would destroy all the monsters on that level herself. Yusuf, full of admiration, called her a beauty, not hiding his delight at her confidence and strength. Yusuf understood that he could no longer sell sweets near the dungeon, for he didn't have the proper license. However, inside the dungeon, where the rules were different, trading was possible. This gave him hope, and he decided that he could enter. But even so, his worries did not leave him. Thoughts of the unknown and possible difficulties still troubled him. The entrance to the dungeon resembled a subway entrance, but Yusuf was not only stunned by its resemblance to the familiar city infrastructure, the walls themselves began to glow, creating a mystical atmosphere. He stood there, unable to tear his gaze away, fascinated and dumbfounded. Mira, noticing his surprise, calmly explained that this staircase had 60 steps. As promised, Merle led Yusuf to a place where he could take care of business. Descending deeper and deeper, they finally reached the end of the stairs. Despite his anxiety, Yusuf was genuinely excited to be able to continue his business, even if it was in a place as unusual and dangerous as the dungeon. It was a chance for him not to lose what he had started. Mira and Merle had once again firmly confirmed, trading near the entrance was not allowed. It was a violation, and even the adventurers themselves would resent such lawlessness. Eventually, the company reached the very entrance to the dungeon. A massive archway of dark stone spread out before them. They stepped inside and began to look around the dungeon. Merle and Mira walked confidently, as if they were returning to a familiar place, oblivious to the darkness and coolness around them. Yusu, on the other hand, was wary, his eyes darting around, constantly looking around, trying not to miss a single detail. Everything here was new and unsettling to him, every sound echoing in his head. Merle praised Yusu for his efforts. He had made it all the way to the second zone's destination despite the anxiety and unfamiliar conditions. Mira was relieved that no monsters had been encountered along the way, and that lifted the spirits of the group. In response, Yusu hurriedly kept up his end of the bargain and pulled out treats, his acquaintance's favorite sweets. Merle had already reached out for the package of monster chips, but was surprised to find that they were gone. Yusu had discreetly explained that he had reduced the assortment and had taken only the essentials with him, but the conditions of the dungeon didn't allow him to take too much. Merle, as if exaggerating on purpose, sighed dramatically and looked at Yusu sadly, even letting out a tear as if she had lost something precious. Yusu confusedly began to make excuses, explaining that the dungeon could be dangerous, and he simply couldn't afford to carry everything. In the middle of this awkward moment, he suddenly remembered the very chips he hadn't had time to finish had been given to the owner of Badakuro, the place where he was staying for the night. The woman had been delighted with the gift at the time. Thinking back on it, Yusu suddenly caught the sensation that the distance between him and her was beginning to shrink again. In the pack he gave away, he found a very valuable card that could still be useful. He had it with him. Soon Merle and Mira said their goodbyes and went deeper into the dungeon. Yusu had accidentally found a valuable map in the same bag of chips he had given to the owner of Badakuro and now kept it with him, thinking it was a good omen. Soon after, Merle and Mira bid him farewell. They traveled onward, going deeper into the dungeon, leaving Yusu alone at his chosen trading place, ready to begin a new chapter of his life. Yusu began to look around carefully, assessing the place where he was to conduct his trade. The atmosphere was unfamiliar, but not uncomfortable, with people setting up their small shops right in the stone niches, as if the underground marketplace had a life of its own. Deciding it was worth making acquaintances, he headed over to say hello to his neighbors. Next to him was Mirai, selling fragrant tea that smelled of warmth and tranquility. On the other side was a sturdy blacksmith named Sangha, surrounded by tools and workpieces. Suddenly, there was a barely perceptible rustle in the silence, which ran along the walls and echoed through the shopping area. Everyone was instantly alert, and the atmosphere changed dramatically. Sangha was already holding a massive hammer. It became clear these were monsters. The dungeon was a reminder of its true nature. Even in the trading zone, safety could be an illusion. Yusu knew something like this could happen. The dungeon does not forgive carelessness. But he was prepared. He had that valuable map with him, found in a pack of chips, and it gave him confidence. The first silhouettes appeared from the shadows of the tunnel. It was a horde of goblins. There were many of them, and with every step they were getting closer. The dungeon was filled with stomping and muffled guttural roars. Yusu, sensing the growing danger, quickly pulled out a monster summoning card. He didn't hesitate and activated it, hoping that the situation wouldn't get out of hand. From behind a bright flash, a standard summoned C-rank goblin appeared in front of him, a creature not as dangerous as the ones that were already moving towards them. This goblin was quite weak, and Yusu knew that even a novice could handle it. However, even though the goblin was only one of many monsters, its strength wasn't enough to handle an entire horde, and it was only one. This didn't cause Yusu to be afraid. He believed that the goblin could handle it. Yusu watched in amazement as his goblin, despite his apparent weakness, confidently dealt with a horde of monsters. Every strike was precise, every maneuver well thought out. The goblin, unlike his less organized brethren, acted with extraordinary agility, and with each passing moment the horde fell. Despite the goblin's success, however, Yusu quickly realized that there were many more monsters. Yusu wasted no time and began summoning other creatures with his cards. They were all C-rank, but their variety could be crucial. The first card summoned a pixie fairy, a small creature with incredible agility. The pixie, with her quick and unnerving movements, began to distract the monsters, confusing and confounding them. Next, he used the card of a feathered piranha, a bird with a powerful bite, capable of piercing through the monster's defenses with its sharp beak. These new helpers began to quickly reduce the number of enemies, creating chaos in the ranks of the horde and giving Yusuha a chance at victory. With each strike and maneuver of the goblin, the situation began to change. He confidently thinned the ranks of the monsters, with each new movement his blows becoming more precise and deadly. The goblin, despite his outward rudeness and primitive weapons, turned out to be a real fighter. Yusu was shocked at the magnitude of the battle. His hands were trembling, and the sweat running down his forehead was a testament to the tension and surprise. He realized that the battle had taken an unpredictable turn. Usually only one goblin, no more, would emerge from the mist. Everyone around him was shocked. Even the experienced adventurers and merchants, who had long been accustomed to the dungeon, had not expected such a large number of monsters. The goblin summoned by Yusu disappeared because 3 minutes had passed since he was summoned, and his time was over. At that moment, he was called out by the other dungeon merchants, offering to pick up the reward for defeating the monsters. Yusu, surprised, realized that even merchants could earn money by taking part in battles with monsters, and that the dungeon was not only a place for trading, but also for capitalizing on such unexpected situations. Yusa asked if he could share his loot with the other traders. He was answered that since the victory was his, it was up to him to decide how to dispose of the bounty. He looked over his loot, a few magic crystals that were worth about 10 lire each, and 200 lire in pure coins. The total came to 240 lira, and Yusa felt more confident, understanding exactly how adventurers made money in the dungeons. In the end, Yusu was at a disadvantage, because despite receiving 240 lira, he had spent 3 cards to summon creatures, and each of them had a different price. With the cost of the cards taken into account, his net profit was much less than he had expected. However, the other merchants in the dungeon were happy that Yusu was with them at this moment. They began to call him a summoner, which caused him embarrassment. Yusu hurriedly rebuffed, assuring that he was just an ordinary confectioner and not a magic summoner. But as soon as he said that, the adventurers, the same ones who used to buy his sweets at the entrance to the dungeon, suddenly appeared. They recognized him and happily approached him. Yusu hurriedly opened his candy shop, with a smile on his face as he prepared to sell the sweets. He felt at home here. The atmosphere of the dungeon with its unique merchants and adventurers didn't embarrass him. However, after noon, the dungeon became considerably quieter than before. Yusu, sensing the lull, decided to ask Sangha and Mirai if they were still working at this hour. Sangha, grinning, replied that his main work was just beginning. Adventurers constantly need help with weapons, and there were always many requests for his blacksmithing. Mirai in turn explained that her tea might be needed by injured adventurers, especially those returning from battles. And just as it was lunchtime, something happened. Manurva appeared, looking for Yusu. She didn't know that he had recently been ticketed for illegal trading near the dungeon and required to purchase a license, which he didn't have enough money for. Yusu was surprised that Manurva was looking for him. The other merchants in the dungeon thought she was an evil and gloomy person, but Yusu assured her that she was his friend and asked that he not judge her by her appearance. Suddenly, Manurva stepped closer to Yusu, suddenly remembering something important. Manurva, slightly embarrassed, held out a packed box of food to Yusu, offering to eat lunch together if it was okay with him. This came as a surprise to Yusu. He hadn't expected such a gesture and was confused for a moment, not knowing how to react. It was a neatly assembled cube bento, a sandwich with fried chicken, bacon, lettuce, and tomato, and for dessert, a brightly colored fruit assortment. Manurva admitted that he had accidentally cooked more than he could eat himself. Yusu was completely confused by the fact that Manurva had made it all by himself. To him, it was unexpected and even a little touching. Tasting the sandwich, Yusu was pleasantly impressed. The flavor was rich and balanced. He recognized with burning eyes that Manurva really knew how to cook. Manurva was genuinely happy that Yusu liked everything and began to dance with joy right on the spot. Yusu had seen this reaction before, and while it looked quite fun, it made him a little tense with its unexpected emotionality. Yusu decided he wanted to treat Manurva in return as well, and offered to top off the meal with a cup of tea. He approached Mirai and politely asked for a single serving, to which the latter, slightly intimidated by Manurva's strong aura, quickly agreed. At that moment, Manurva suddenly shouted, outraged at what he was doing, and why was he talking to other girls? Yusu was completely perplexed. After all, he only wanted to buy tea, not realizing what would cause such a reaction. He brought them each a cup of tea for lunch. Manurva, upset, turned away and began to mutter quietly to himself that he had succumbed to the charms of a mature woman and it was a mistake. Yusu didn't understand why he was so upset, thinking that maybe Manurva just wasn't full. Meanwhile, the day was coming to an end, and the adventurers returning from the lower floors began to walk up the corridors of the dungeon. Mira and Merle returned from the lower floors, both tired but satisfied. Merle, glowing with energy and enthusiasm, smilingly suggested to Yusuha that they open a pastry shop even deeper into the dungeon the next day, where she said there would be more customers and opportunities. Merle explained that near the stairs on the next level of the dungeon was a spacious room, large enough to house a full store. Yusu thought about the suggestion, realizing that this could be a great opportunity to expand his business. This place served as a temporary refuge for adventurers. It was where they rested between descents into the depths of the dungeon. Merle was sure that this was where Yusuf would be able to make a lot more money, as the flow of adventurers was steady and the sweets would come in handy. Plus, in her opinion, it would be more convenient for everyone. Yusuf still had some rockets and a few monster cards left, so he decided he might as well take a chance and give it a try. He only clarified with Merle exactly where to go. Mira assured with a smile that they would guide Yusuf to the new place, and he wouldn't be alone. Yusuf was slightly embarrassed by this attention. Manurva suddenly appeared, and her gaze immediately fell on Mira, who was flirting with Yusuf with a smile. Manurva, noticing this, felt a wave of irritation. She was sure that if the mood remained as good as it was, she would do something to this girl sooner or later. Manurva couldn't let someone take Yusuf's attention so easily. Yusuf, irritated by what was happening, couldn't help himself and turned to Manurva and said that he wouldn't let her treat his regular customers like that. In a burst of emotion, he gave her a light slap, hoping the gesture would make her realize that such actions were unacceptable. Merle, noticing the change in Yusuf's mood, asked if he was going to move deeper into the dungeon, to which Yusuf nodded confidently, confirming his decision. The next morning, they reconvened at the entrance to the dungeon as agreed. This time, however, Mira and Merle seemed less animated. The reason for their glum mood was Manurva, who had unexpectedly appeared at the dungeon entrance that morning. His grim figure immediately caught his eye, and Yusu was surprised to see the Priest of Darkness in this place. Manurva, noticing his reaction, only said quietly that their fates seemed to intertwine more often than one might expect. The four of them entered the dungeon without further ado and began to descend the familiar stairs leading deeper and deeper. Soon Yusuf found himself in parts of the dungeon that were unfamiliar to him and realized that there were 2 more floors to traverse before his new outlet. The passageway they followed was much wider than he had expected. Merle explained that this widening was necessary. People often congregated in this area, especially when large groups of adventurers passed through or merchants were temporarily delayed. Manurva stopped abruptly, eyes glittering, and he exclaimed loudly, demanding an explanation. Were Merle and Mira really taking Yusuf to the common room so he could do whatever he wanted to do there? His voice echoed down the hallway. Merle nodded quietly, clarifying that Yusuf was going to open a pastry shop there. The air seemed to freeze for a moment. Yusuf shifted his gaze from Manurva to the girls in confusion. He didn't understand why he was reacting so strangely again, as if his every action was causing a storm of emotions. Eventually they reached the right room in the dungeon, and Yusuf was stunned by its size. The spacious room looked more like a banquet hall in a rich mansion than an ordinary recreation area. The high ceilings, wide walls, and clean, almost cozy space surprised him. Wasting no time, he excitedly began setting up his pastry shop. After using the spell to open the pastry shop, Yusuf was shocked at how it had been transformed. Had he really leveled up that much? Neat counters, shelves of brightly colored packaging, and cozy lamps appeared. Dazedly looking around, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Mira leaned over the counter curiously and asked Yusuf what the inscription, written in neat hieroglyphics, meant. It said Yahagi's confectionery in Japanese, which puzzled the girl. She found the font strange and unlike the local one. It wasn't surprising, since Japanese belonged to a completely different world from where Yusuf himself came from. Suddenly Merle noticed something unusual and exclaimed in surprise. Yusuf turned around at her cry, trying to figure out what had caught her attention in his new candy shop. It turned out to be a vending machine for a game called Dungeon Strategy. The game was something strange. You had to flip 10 coins along the edge that were stacked near a lever. When players reached the 7th basement floor, a prize would appear. Yusuf was surprised to read that this prize was a panacea. Yusuf thought about the fact that the price of playing this machine was indeed higher than its Japanese counterparts, but it looked quite impressive in appearance. Yusuf thought that perhaps that justified the high price of the game, because the prize in the machine might not just be a toy or a coin, but some kind of panacea, something that could solve important problems. Yusuf was surprised to see the machine and asked Mira how good the reward was. Mira, visibly embarrassed, replied with surprise that panacea, it was an amazing prize. She believed that this item was worth at least 1,000,000 lira, and that even experienced adventurers rarely met people who had the panacea. Yusuf realized that the reward he was about to receive was far more valuable than he could have imagined. Merle, upon hearing Mira and Yusuf's conversation, instantly pulled out her money with burning eyes and confidently declared that she should definitely get her hands on this panacea worth 1,000,000. Merle was confident in her abilities. She knew very well that unlike ordinary gambling, where everything depends on luck, here everything is controlled by her skill. With this approach, she believed that she had every chance of winning. She was not only talented but also a smart woman. Despite her confidence, Merle was unable to make the right throw in the game. The coins she tossed didn't fall where they should. Merle tried again and again, not noticing how quickly her money was disappearing. Each new throw was more and more strenuous, and even though she felt she was almost there, her luck was still against her. Turning around, Merle noticed that several adventurers had gathered around, watching her failures. Frustrated, she cast one last glance at the machine and left the room with her head down without saying goodbye. Yusu, seeing her condition, wished everyone to take care of themselves. That evening, as the adventurers were about to leave the room, Yusuf, standing at the exit, wished them pleasant dreams. He wanted to hurry to close up and go home himself. His proceeds today amounted to over 4,000 liras. Standing at the vending machine, Yusuf thought about it. Merle was so close to winning, but considering he was now the owner, he couldn't help but try it himself. He walked over to the counter, picked up a few coins, and thought for a moment. There had been a man in his past life who had shown him how to play the game properly. The dungeon was full of dangers, and Yusuf couldn't help but think about how important the panacea was to him. He knew that it could be his salvation at any moment, but getting it was the only way to win at this game. The daily sales had increased significantly, and now the amount Yusuf had allowed him to try his luck at the game several times. Yusuf smiled as he saw Mira and Merle enter the candy shop, happy and full of energy. He knew the day was coming to an end, but the decision was obvious. Working here was much more profitable than the entrance to the dungeon. His regular customers were happy, and new customers were starting to show up more often. Yusuf, noticing Manurva in the company of Mira and Merle, suggested they all go home together. Manurva was a bit wary as usual, but seemed genuinely concerned for Yusuf's safety. He said he was worried about him, but if Mira and Merle were with him, he hoped they would let him join them. Yusuf, surprised by this show of concern, sincerely said that Manurva was very kind. However, Mira and Merle, upon hearing this, only exchanged a glance. An understatement was read in their eyes. When they began to ascend from the dungeon, everyone immediately felt an awkward atmosphere. There was an ominous aura in the air, emanating from Manurva. His silence and cold gaze did not add comfort to their company. Yusuf, on the other hand, couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Yusuf decided it was worth checking with Merle to see if there were any other secluded places in the dungeon where he could continue his game. He didn't want to attract too much attention, because if he started yelling or making noise in the inn, he might get kicked out, and it would be even more dangerous outside. Too much risk of falling into the clutches of muggers. He knew he had to act wisely, and quietly look for a suitable place to try and win the panacea. Manurva, listening intently to Yusuf, suddenly approached him, suddenly startling him. He said quietly but confidently that he had a solution. Yusuf became wary, expecting Manurva to suggest something unexpected. However, Manurva only uttered that he would walk him home. Merle couldn't contain her laughter at the surprised look on his serious face, but she covered her mouth with her hand in time. Mira, for her part, was equally surprised, but quickly perked up as she watched it all unfold. Yusuf turned to face Manurva and asked in surprise, did he really have a home? After all, Manurva, like himself, used to rent a regular room in an inn. It turned out that Manurva had recently rented a whole house, and now he didn't care if people played and shouted there. The only thing Manurva asked in exchange was for Yusuf to have dinner with him. Mira and Merle were even more surprised, but smiled and watched with interest. Yusuf still couldn't figure out if Manurva was taking all of this too seriously. However, he only wanted to help his friend. Yusuf smiled cheerfully and agreed to Manurva's request without giving it much thought. Meanwhile, Mira and Merle were already immersed in their romantic fantasies, imagining the development of events quite differently than Yusuf himself. Manurva himself couldn't believe what was happening. Everything seemed like a dream. Yusuf was really going to come to his house. He remembered how he hadn't been afraid to touch his shoulder earlier, and now he didn't know how to admit that he was actually a girl. His emotions were raging inside him, but in the end, love was the reason for all his actions. Manurva was actually the witch Michelle, the very one about whom the terrible legends went about, and whose head was hunted by adventurers for a long time. Now Michelle, hiding under the name of Manurva, was certain that she would have to love Yusu in secret. She had no right to reveal her true identity. Yusu bought adventurers' clothes from a shop just before the entrance to the dungeon. His old clothes, while comfortable, were not suitable for the dangerous conditions. The new outfit was much more practical, dense fabric, lots of pockets. His business in the dungeon was going really well, sales were increasing every day, and Yusu was beginning to think about moving out of Bodakuro to a more cozy place closer to his new location. Looking around the shelves of the store where he had recently purchased his adventurer's clothing, he noticed something that could be useful for setting up home. Turning to Manurva, he asked with interest if he had heating in the house. After all, tonight he was going to stay the night with his first friend in this new world, an event that seemed important and almost solemn. He felt excitement and at the same time warmth on his soul. To make the evening cozier, Yusu, still looking at the items in the store, asked Manurva if he drank alcohol. He smiled and offered to take some. Yusu chose a red wine that cost 3,000 lira. It was dark, with a rich, tart flavor that was different from what he was used to in his home world. Overjoyed, Yusu said he couldn't wait for the evening. Michelle couldn't understand what Yusu wanted to do, but thinking about it made her smile, and her face slightly reddened with embarrassment. As she danced, Michelle thought about how Yusu was perfect and everything would be fine. Yusu, noticing her movements, again didn't realize what the strange gesture was, and just shook his head slightly, not knowing how to react. Eventually, they headed to Michelle's house. From around the corner, trying not to give themselves away, Mira and Merle peeked out, both wide-eyed and holding back excitement. Watching the departing couple, they exchanged glances and whispered to each other with certainty that this was definitely a date. Mira frowned, not fully understanding if this was normal, a date between Yusu and the gloomy priest, since they were both men, at least at first glance. Her confusion was only growing. Merle, on the other hand, was recalling one of her favorite novels with shining eyes. Mira and Merle crept behind them all the way to the house, holding their breath and trying not to make a sound. However, as they looked around the last corner where the house should have been, they stopped in surprise. The street was empty. Neither Yusuf nor Manurva were anywhere to be seen. The girls glanced around, not understanding how they could have lost sight of him. Had they simply disappeared? Meanwhile, Yusuf and Manurva were walking quietly down that very street, unaware that they were being followed. Yusuf looked around with interest and marveled at how quiet and peaceful the area was, as if all the noise of the city had been left behind. Manurva explained that there was a special magical blockage in this place. Turning around, Yusuf decided to check with Manurva to clarify his actions. Entering the house, Yusuf was pleasantly surprised. Everything inside looked well maintained, clean, and even refined. The interior was warm and cozy. Soft carpets, neatly arranged furniture, and expensive-looking details. The atmosphere seemed to envelop him in peace and comfort. He hadn't expected Manurva's place to be so pleasant. He, in turn, modestly remarked that the house could have been better. The house was surprisingly cozy and well-kept, even with its own bathroom. Manurva gestured for Yusuha to use it, but he soon began to get visibly nervous, asking if he was hungry or if he needed anything else. It was obvious that he was feeling very nervous about this evening. Suddenly, Manurva coughed, gulping air convulsively with his mouth. Yusuf didn't hesitate for a second, jumping up to him. Manurva looked away, trying to hide the tremor in his voice, and quietly apologized for what had happened. He explained that it was just a surge of power out of control, and assured Yusu that there was nothing to worry about. But despite his assurances, he looked pale and haggard. Yusu watched him doubtfully, not realizing if it was really because of the excess magical energy. Was such a reaction a normal consequence of magic? Manurva insistently suggested that Yusu take a bath while he took care of dinner himself. He firmly refused any help, unwilling to let his guest into the kitchen. Yusu didn't argue, but gave in and went to the bathroom, deciding it was best not to disturb his host if he was so insistent. After making sure Yusu had gone to the bathroom, Michelle slowly removed her mask. The thought that now she could do something good for him made her heart beat faster and her blood flow faster. Her blood pressure rose with excitement and anticipation. This was her chance, the perfect moment to cast off the image of the sullen priest and try her best as a true mistress of the house. Michelle was vigorously chopping vegetables. Every bite as perfect as anything she did. There was an atmosphere of concentration and light magic in the kitchen. With every movement of her hand, she used spells that sped up the cooking process, enhancing the flavor and texture of the ingredients. The scent of fresh herbs and spices was in the air, and even the kitchen itself was filled with magical energy, as if with each addition of ingredients, she was putting a piece of herself into the dish. Suddenly Yusu's voice came from behind her. She was in the kitchen and still without her mask. Michelle continued cooking without turning around. She was too focused on the process, trying to make everything perfect. But when she heard Yusu's voice, her heart skipped a beat. He was in the kitchen, and didn't seem to notice that she was still without her mask. Michelle felt her heart beat faster when she noticed Yusu's physical form. He was indeed not only handsome, but pumped up as well, and that caught her attention. She tried to hide her feelings, but it was hard to remain indifferent looking at his musculature. She wanted to touch him right now. Yusu asked if there was anything he could do to help, but Michelle suggested he do what he had really come to do, play the machine. She didn't even think about stopping him, as she could cook dinner, but Yusu seemed much more interested in that. He, somewhat embarrassed, agreed, himself a little oblivious to his intention to try his luck. Michelle was embarrassed and turned away, trying to concentrate on cooking. She didn't want her excitement to be noticeable. Yusu didn't immediately realize what had happened. He wondered if maybe she really did get oil on her, or something else, since his friend had suddenly become so withdrawn. He had gone to another room to play the machine. Now he didn't need to summon all his confectionery. He could only summon the things he needed. Today, Yusu had come to Manurva's house with the purpose of trying to knock out a special elixir. He was full of hope that luck would be on his side. After many failed attempts to win at the machine, Yusu began to realize that the task was not so easy. Suddenly, he heard Manurva calling him to the table for dinner. Yusu realized that he was just about to get hungry, and this invitation was just in time. Walking into the kitchen, Yusu caught a mesmerizing sight. On the table was lobster mousse, bone and lamb grilled with mustard, and a glass of red wine. All the food looked not only incredibly expensive, but delicious. And the smell was so appetizing that even the air seemed to be soaked with that divine aroma. Yusuf couldn't help himself, and excitedly said out loud how delicious everything looked. Manurva, slightly embarrassed by such a compliment, quickly added that there would also be dessert for dinner, thus trying to hide his excitement. Yusu, slightly surprised, asked Manurva when he planned to take off his mask. He noticed that the mask had been on his friend's face since the beginning and didn't understand why he never took it off. Manurva abruptly replied that he only planned to take it off for dinner. Manurva, noticing his excitement, chuckled quietly and slowly reached for the mask. Yusu watched each movement eagerly, anticipating the moment when he would finally see his friend's face. Manurva, noticing Yusu's displeasure, grinningly used magic to hide his face as he removed his mask to eat his dinner, and, assuring that he would be more comfortable that way, continued his meal. Yusuf wasn't particularly happy about this decision, but tried not to let it show. They wished each other a pleasant appetite and dined quietly. The food was delicious, the atmosphere cozy, and the evening passed in a relaxed atmosphere where they ate to their heart's content and enjoyed their time at the table. Michelle sat in the shadows of her thoughts, unable to forget everything that had happened during that evening. Yusuf had so captured her attention and care that she couldn't imagine her life without him. She felt spoiled by his attention, and now it seemed impossible for her to let him go. Michelle sank into the darkness of her thoughts, like a fog that thickened with each passing moment. A dangerous idea popped into her head to create an endless corridor where Yusuf could never escape. Michelle, in desperation, screamed. She realized that if she really implemented this idea, she would lose everything, even his respect. She was sure that if she did that, Yusuf would hate her, and she would lose him forever. But her thoughts were in such chaos that she couldn't calm down. Yusuf, hearing this screaming from the other room, thought that perhaps the cats were picking a fight. He, on the other hand, being tired after the day, went to bed quietly, unaware of what was happening to his friend. As suddenly, Michelle was right above the sleeping Yusuf in his room. She was sitting on the edge of his bed, watching Yusuf sleeping peacefully. His breathing was calm, and the world around them seemed to have frozen. Yusuf jumped up in bed, screaming in panic with fright when he noticed an intruder in the room. His heart was beating frantically, and he stared bewildered at the person sitting next to him. Manurva, as if nothing had happened, calmly wished him a good morning. Yusuf, still reeling from the shock, finally managed to squeeze out the question, what was he doing here? Manurva, a little embarrassed by his act, admitted that he was just watching Yusuf sleep. Yusuf noticed the strange magical writings and symbols on the floor, and, feeling even more puzzled, asked what they were. Manurva, slightly embarrassed and clearly feeling uncomfortable with his action, hurriedly explained that it was nothing but an endless corridor. He immediately began erasing the symbols, trying to remove them, as if afraid that Yusuf would misunderstand something. Yusuf wondered if it all sounded like something sinister, and curiously asked Manurva if he was doing any magical research. Manurva quickly replied that it was something else entirely, avoiding a detailed explanation. However, Yusuf couldn't help himself and peeked over his shoulder, seeing the strange symbols on the floor. He smiled and, with a sincere tone, said that his friend had stayed up until midnight, but despite that, he would like to thank Manurva for letting him stay the night. Despite his friend Manurva seemed to be a rather closed-off person. Manurva, a little embarrassed, admitted that people often tried to run away at the sight of him, but Yusuf stayed despite that. In response, Yusuf asked with a smile to forget about it, because he didn't run away, but instead chose to stay by his side. Manurva, becoming more serious, warned Yusuf to be careful with him, and that he would soon realize everything. It sounded rather ominous, but Yusuf didn't bother to delve into the meaning of his friend's words. Meanwhile, Manurva added that breakfast was ready and invited him to the table. There was a strange tension in the air, but at this moment all his attention was focused on the upcoming breakfast. He thanked Manurva for his help and remarked that the breakfast was very good indeed. Over their morning meal, they quietly discussed the plans for the day and came to the decision to head to the dungeon together. As they walked through the streets of the city, Yusuf, deftly maneuvering between passers-by, decided to discreetly inquire whether Manurva, like the rest of the adventurers, was chasing after the witch they were so diligently searching for. I heard that it was a waste of time. Manurva replied calmly that she had more important things to do, and was not interested in foolish rumor-mongering. Manurva showed the small device she was working on. Yusuf wondered with interest if it was magical. As it turned out, it was an amulet capable of storing magical power. He wondered if its principle was similar to the batteries from his homeworld. When he asked about the connection of this amulet to the dungeons, Manurva explained, in the deepest part of the dungeon there was a rift from which a high concentration of magical essence emanated, the perfect source for charging such artifacts. It was in this place that Manurva conducted her experiments, filling magical spheres with the essence emanating from the rift. She admitted that she had originally intended to leave the city in search of a better life, but she realized that such sources could not be found anywhere else. This rift was unique, and to leave it would mean abandoning all her research and hopes. Eventually, Yusuf came to a rest room in the dungeon. He thanked his friend for walking him to the rest room. Manurva suddenly stopped, as if remembering something important that he had missed. Manurva, still slightly pensive, held out a neatly wrapped bento to Yusuf. The package was tight and nice, tied with a thin rope. When Yusuf took it in his hands, he was surprised to note how heavy this lunch was, as if it contained more than just food. Manurva said that today he was going to go down into the dungeon to an even deeper level, where many people hesitate to go. He noted that he would be out of town in 3 days, as he intended to spend that time downstairs doing research. Yusuf, upon hearing of his plans, expressed concern and wished Manurva to take care of himself, realizing how dangerous such expeditions were. Opening his pastry shop, Yusuf was happy to receive regular customers, Regal among them. He approached Yusuf gratefully, noting that his leg, injured a few days ago, now felt much better. Yusuf, smiling, asked Regal to remember to thank Manurva, who he said had been of considerable help in healing his wounds. Regal nodded, promising to be sure to thank Manurva as well the next time they met. Noticing a fresh injury on Regal's arm that was the result of a bad fall, Yusuf immediately offered him a solution. He said with a smile that there was just the right product for such cases, and that it would be a great way to speed up healing. Yusuf, with a smile, pulled out a Moroccan gourd, small sweet and sour cream candies that at first glance looked like a simple treat. He explained that you should eat them with a wooden spoon for best effect. These candies not only satisfied hunger, but also had the effect of slightly repairing wounds. Regal, a little surprised at such an unusual offer, curiously tasted one of the candies, feeling the sweetness and sourness pleasantly cooling the flavor. Regal was surprised when he noticed that the scratch on his arm disappeared literally after he ate the candy. This result was beyond his expectations. He couldn't believe that a candy shop could not only enjoy the flavor, but also treat wounds. Yusuf listened to Regal's verdict with a smile. He was pleased that his product had proven useful, even though the customer noted that the candy was less effective than Mirai's revitalizing tea. However, Regal emphasized that the candy had one undeniable advantage. It was cheaper and could be easily carried around. Mirai and Merle entered the room, attracting attention with their sudden appearance. Merle, hearing the end of the conversation, immediately expressed delight. She was fascinated by the idea of candy that could heal wounds, and without wasting any time, she immediately decided to buy some. Mira remembered that Merle had recently struck out, and her gaze involuntarily shifted to her friend, who was already happily munching on a sweet and sour flavored candy. Merle, clearly satisfied, continued to savor the sweet treat, but after a moment turned to Yusuf with a question regarding what had happened yesterday. Her face was full of curiosity, and despite the unexpected joy of the candy, she couldn't forget the events of last night. Before Merle could ask her question, however, a new group of adventurers, led by Garm, entered the common room. He immediately headed to the counter and ordered 4 Moroccan gourds without hesitation. Yusuf was surprised at how quickly Garm found out about the new item. After all, it had just come on sale. He couldn't understand how news of the Moroccan gourds had spread so quickly among the adventurers. Garm, noticing Merle's pouting lips and obvious displeasure at something, approached with interest and asked what was wrong. In response, he heard a quiet muttering about honoring the queue. At noon, the noisy crowd of adventurers disappeared. The silence that filled the space seemed almost unaccustomed after all the talk and bustle, but it was comfortable. Only Merle and Mira, who now had some free time, remained in the break room. Merle, fascinated by the new machines, had already begun to play, manipulating the levers and buttons with concentration. Mira sat next to her, watching her friend play, smiling from time to time. Merle, not hiding her frustration, kept trying, but each time the result was unsuccessful. She couldn't understand how she could keep making mistakes despite 20 attempts. Mira, watching her friend, replied that she couldn't even do that, and Yusuf commented that this game had its own subtleties, and it took not only luck but also a bit of cunning to win. When it was time for lunch, Yusuf decided to grab a bite to eat. He remembered the box Manurva had packed for him, but when he opened it, he sighed in surprise. Manurva had made a fancy box for Yusuf, filled with a variety of foods. Inside were slices of banana cake, mouth-watering grilled chicken, pickled vegetables, fresh fruits, and even small desserts. Each dish was carefully prepared, and everything looked like it had been done with care and attention. Yusuf couldn't help but marvel at how delicious and neatly packaged it all was. Suddenly Merle noticed what Yusuf was doing and wondered if it was a bento from her favorite person. Her attentive eyes followed him closely and were unusually serious, not at all like her usual playful gaze. Yusuf jokingly replied that his wife's name was Manurva, but it was a guy and he was his friend. Merle, pursing her lips, clearly disagreed with that explanation. Her eyes squinted, and she even tilted her head slightly at one point, trying to figure out what was really going on. Mira, standing next to her, said she agreed that Yusuf and Manurva seemed like good friends. Merle continued to take offense, trying to prove her point, and Mira watched her reaction with a smile, not understanding why she was so worried. Merle stated loudly that she was sure Manurva loved Yusuf. Her face was slightly colored with a blush, whether from embarrassment or the fervor of her words. She was pointing her finger at the people she was talking to, as if she was trying to convince everyone that she was right. There was a pause, and everyone pondered, trying to digest what they had heard. There was tension in the air, as if everyone was searching for the right words to answer. Yusuf and Mira simultaneously started saying that Merle was wrong, trying to explain that she had been misinterpreting what was happening all along. Merle, offended by their words, didn't hold back and loudly declared that she was absolutely right, firmly convinced of her point of view. Merle, increasingly losing her temper, yelled at Yusuf, not understanding how he could be so blind and really not guess Manurva's feelings. Yusuf himself was beginning to have doubts. After all, he did have a luxurious and carefully packed bento prepared for him, as if hinting at more than just friendship. However, Yusuf tried to explain that he didn't consider Manurva's act as a declaration of love, and that he shouldn't jump to conclusions. Merle snorted in response, and said it was more like he was making up his own difficulties, instead of just accepting the obvious. After another loss in the machine, Merle sighed, and said it was time for them to leave. They needed to make some money before the day was over. Yusuf sank into thought. Manurva was a good person, and no matter what, he did show care and kindness. However, thinking back on certain situations, there was a strange impression as if Manurva couldn't stand girls. Deciding that Manurva wouldn't be in town for another 3 days anyway, Yusuf decided to put all thoughts aside for later. He would still have time to think things over. In the morning, 3 days later, Yusuf happened to run into Manurva on one of the city streets. When Manurva heard that they were both heading to the dungeon, she offered to escort Yusu down. This seemed a bit odd to him. He could have easily walked down the stairs by himself. Nevertheless, he didn't refuse the company. Once again, Manurva handed Yusu a bento, and once again, it was quite impressive. Packaged with care, radiating warmth, and the aroma of freshly cooked food. Remembering the conversation with Merle 3 days ago, Yusu wondered if he should just ask directly. Yusu, tormented by the question of whether to ask it right now, called out to Manurva before he got too far away. Manurva stopped, turning around with slight surprise, but ready to listen. Without hesitation, Yusu took Manurva's hand and put something in it. It was a panacea from the machine, a gift to thank him for everything he had done, including taking care of him and making bento. Yusu was sure Manurva was strong, but he kept safety in mind. He said he would get another panacea for himself, because if he could manage it once, he could do it again. Manurva took the panacea, and at that moment realized something important to himself. Michelle, hidden under the mask, was sure that it had happened the moment her and Yusu's hands had first touched. She realized in that moment that it was love. After all, he'd given someone he valued something he wanted so badly, without expecting anything in return. The gesture was far more meaningful than he had realized. This gesture was very important to her. The illness she suffered from was difficult and painful, and what he did for her was a moment she would remember forever. It wasn't just a show of caring, it was proof that someone was willing to make sacrifices for her well-being. Michelle was sure she would never forget his kindness and the support she received. On the morning that Yusu opened the pastry shop in the break room, he greeted his regular customers with a warm smile. Merle, wasting no time, went straight to the counter and, smiling, began to complain that the package of Moroccan pumpkin was too small. Yusu, with a light laugh, promised her that he planned to release a new package soon, 10 times larger, so that everyone could enjoy the flavor and benefits even longer. Manurva, with a sly smile, suddenly appeared in the common room, making Merle shriek in fright. He did it on purpose, enjoying the reaction, while Yusa continued to greet his other regulars like Regal, Garm, and many others with a smile. He couldn't get rid of the thought that when he was told he would be running a candy store, he kept thinking about what it would bring him. Yusuf really enjoyed his job and was sure that it was something that brought him fulfillment. He was willing to put all his energy and passion into it, hoping that this period of his life would last as long as possible. During this time at the castle, the king learned that the witch was able to obtain the panacea from the dungeon store. This news alarmed him, for she could use this artifact to cure herself. The king was shocked when he learned that it was in Yahagi Yusu's candy shop that the witch was able to obtain the panacea. There is a new capsule machine containing miniature furniture from a well-known manufacturer. Each piece was handmade by an experienced craftsman with attention to detail and quality. The first release was a special collection, a set of exquisite chairs and sofas, perfect for collectors or dollhouse decoration. Yusu was delighted with the new merchandise, the delicate and graceful work of artisans from Japan. The miniature furniture was amazing in its detail and quality. Each piece seemed like a true work of art on a reduced scale. It was a great novelty, but it was not in demand at all. No one was buying the capsules. Merle explained to Yusua that the reason was because the idea was too simple. People thought it was nothing special. Mira nodded in agreement, supporting her friend's opinion. Merle also pointed out that the price was too high. Spending 300 lira on a single furniture toy was unreasonable for most. Yusua felt disappointed. He hadn't expected his regular customers to be so pragmatic. Even though all the toys were of high quality, no one was in a hurry to purchase them. Suddenly, a confident voice sounded behind Yusu, stating that he was taking a novelty item. As if snapping out of his own thoughts, Yusuf turned around abruptly. When he turned, however, he saw no one, which surprised him, for he could hear someone's voice quite clearly. He looked around the room, frowned, and listened. Suddenly the same voice came again, distinctly from below, as if it came from under the counter or from the floor. It was a gnome, short, hardly more than 10 centimeters tall, with a serious expression and a neat beard. Merle saw a gnome for the first time in her life. These earth spirits rarely showed themselves in public. They avoided crowds, preferred solitude, and were famous for their wealth. The dwarves bought back all the capsules Yasuha had and added an unexpected gift, a map of the hot spring that was on the second floor of the dungeon. Yasuha was dumbfounded. He didn't expect the dwarves to offer something so amazing. The gnomes thanked Yasuha for selling such quality items, and handed him the card and told him that he could use it as he wished. Manurva, upon hearing the mention of the hot spring, became furious. He sharply stated that one should not bathe with stupid women, expressing his displeasure at how some things may have been perceived or understood. Yusuf calmly explained that hot springs were taken separately and Manurva had nothing to worry about. Merle, not hiding her curiosity, added that even though she and Yusuf were friends, she thought it was quite normal. Mira, on the other hand, without giving it much thought, noted that it was just a bathroom and nothing more. Mira added with a smile that if her acquaintances were shy, they could always cover themselves with a towel. Manurva became furious again upon hearing Myra's words and abruptly stated that he would not forgive her for that comment. The next morning, the entire group gathered at the entrance to the dungeon. Merle could barely contain her impatience. She was ready to rush out. Manurva, on the other hand, was not so easily persuaded to join. She hesitated for a long time, doubting and arguing with herself, but finally, after much persuasion, she agreed to go. Yusuf, noticing Minerva's tired look, inquired if everything was all right, as he looked like he was about to fall asleep on the go. Minerva sighed and confirmed that he had indeed been up all night. He had been dealing with the pests. The map that Yusuf had received said that the hot springs were free of monsters and were safe to rest there. However, Minerva couldn't calm down and kept saying that he would keep an eye on the girls to make sure they didn't do anything embarrassing. Yusuf realized that his words were not taken the way he wanted them to be. Minerva seemed to be too worried about something and couldn't relax even knowing that there was no threat around. Descending to the second floor of the dungeon, Yusuf pondered gloomily about the fact that he had only watched others bravely descend into the depths before, but now for the first time he was stepping into this dark, unknown territory himself. His footsteps echoed in the void. Mira pointed the way to the second floor, and turning around, Merle asked if Yusuf had seen any enemies on the first floor. She warned him to be especially wary on the second, as things were far more dangerous and unpredictable there. Yusuf nodded, feeling the tension in the air growing more palpable. Suddenly, a repetitive noise echoed through the dungeon, which caught the attention of the entire company. Yusuf, startled, suggested that it might have been monsters getting closer with each passing moment. Merle, hearing the scream for the first time, thought it might be a new kind of monster they hadn't encountered yet. Mira listened, then noticed that the rhythm of this sound resembled the singing of a flower insect, but it still sounded different, as if it was a bird. She had never heard anything like it either, and that alarmed her more than anything else. Manurva, despite the panic that had gripped the entire company, calmly stated that there was no need to worry and suggested that it was just a pigeon that had wandered into the dungeon. His statement was met with surprise. Yusuf thought that such a noise could not be made by just one bird, and there were most likely several. Manurva, with his usual calmness, stated that the birds were probably just lost and had flocked together, but despite their presence, they needed to move on. However, the deeper the company descended into the dungeon, The more often they encountered flower insects relentlessly repeating the same warning, "Michelle, the witch is near." Michelle realized that these small insects, squeaking as she approached, were preventing her from hiding. If the company heard their sounds and began to figure out their meaning, they would not be able to continue their journey to the hot springs. Michelle had tried to get rid of these insects as early as yesterday, but all her attempts had been unsuccessful, which was why she hadn't gotten much sleep. Suddenly, she had a brilliant idea that could change everything and allow her to finally get rid of the pesky creatures. Michelle didn't try to destroy the insects, but decided to do something else. She simply replaced their sound with something else, neutral and less noticeable. Using her magical abilities, she created a fake sound signal. However, this plan took a whole night to put into action, and Michelle wasn't sure she could keep up. Her body felt the weight of fatigue, and her eyes increasingly closed with the desire to just fall asleep. Suddenly, Yusuf shouted a warning to Manurva. While she was absorbed in her thoughts and didn't react in time, a goblin crept up behind her. Despite her fatigue, Michelle easily handled the goblin and his companions. Her blade glinted faintly in the dim light and slid through the air, and the monsters fell one by one before she could even react. It was so fast that it seemed as if she had made one subtle movement and the enemies were already defeated. Finally, navigating the map, Manurva announced that they had arrived at the location. However, Merle looked around and noticed that there was only a dead end in front of them. Doubt flashed in her eyes, but Yusuf, noticing her expression, calmly explained that the dwarf had taught him a special spell that opened hidden passageways. He extended his hand, spoke a few words in the ancient language, and suddenly the stone wall in front of them began to gently slide open, revealing a pathway into a brightly lit room. Warm light streamed from within, reflecting off the smooth stone walls, and from the depths came a faint vapor that promised a long-awaited rest. Manurva looked around the room carefully and noted that there was not the slightest trace of monsters here. No scratches, no odor, not even a hint of their presence. Everything looked clean and peaceful, almost unreal for a dungeon. Judging by the map and the steam coming from there, the source was just beyond the next door. The room they found themselves in was spacious and lit with soft light from the crystals embedded in the walls. Everyone looked around, listening to the silence. Soon, Yusuf approached the door at the back of the room, curious as to what was behind it. As they entered the next room, they noticed a huge bathroom filled with warm, steaming water. The warm water filled the room with thick puffs of steam, slowly rising to the ceiling and giving the place an almost fairy tale atmosphere. Yusuf was surprised to find that the spring was right in this room. The others were also excited to see the warm bathtub. No one expected to find such a cozy place in the depths of the dungeon. The water was clear, hot, and surprisingly pleasant, as if specially prepared for relaxation. Yusuf politely invited the girls to use the bath first, realizing how important it was for them to relax after a long journey. He himself, along with Manurva, headed to the next room to wait his turn and give his friends some privacy and rest. Seeing Manurva standing off to the side, immersed in his own thoughts, Yusuf decided that he was still angry or offended. It seemed to him that something strange always happened at the hot springs, and Manurva's tenseness only fueled that feeling. Yusuf shouted towards the bathroom for the girls not to linger too long, making sure to only have a joking sternness in his voice. He wanted to lighten the mood, but at the same time not wait his turn for too long. While waiting for his turn, Yusuf wondered why there were no monsters in this room, like in other parts of the dungeon. Manurva explained that the lack of threats was due to the barrier that surrounded the source and protected it from any outside interference. Suddenly, a brilliant idea popped into Yusuf's head. He remembered one special item from his pastry shop. Manurva, upon seeing the box, inquired interestedly what it was. Yusu opened it with a smile and explained that it was a refrigerator that allowed it to stay cold despite the surrounding temperature. He pulled out several bottles of ramen, a citrus-flavored soft carbonated drink whose consumption improved blood microcirculation. Also in his hands was a bottle of Nikki, a cinnamon extract drink with antipyretic properties. It was an excellent product, and Yusu, looking over the bottles, thought about adding a couple more kinds of candy to the fridge. Manurva was interested in a drink that appeared to regulate magical blood circulation. It sounded rather intriguing, and she decided to try it. Yusu, noticing her interest, advised her to drink it after taking a bath, as he said it would seem even tastier that way and would probably work even better on her. When the girls came out of the bathtub, they couldn't stop praising the water. It was incredibly pleasant, and the warmth was felt in every cell of the body. After taking a bath, they felt the tension go away and their muscles relax, bringing long-awaited relief and a sense of complete harmony. Yusu, watching the girls, noticed that their skin looked much better after the bath. The tone was becoming more even, and the glow on their faces was increasing, indicating that the spring probably had not only a relaxing but also a rejuvenating effect. Mira, holding the item from Yusu's pastry shop, said with a smile that it was really cool. Yusu, seeing her delight, remembered how she bought this item from him yesterday. It was a water gun, a toy that you could fill with water and shoot it at certain pressure points on your body. This effect created a massage that relaxed muscles and relieved tension, especially in the shoulder and lower back areas. Mira, holding the gun in her hands, shared that her stiff shoulders had been bothering her for a long time, but this toy had a real effect on her, relieving pain and tension. Yusa understood why Mira was having trouble with her shoulders, and was pleased to hear that the toy gun actually worked as promised. Taking 2 more of those guns, he excitedly turned to Manurva and said that they should try it too. He was sure it would help relieve tension and make them feel better. However, seeing Manurva heading in the opposite direction, Yusa couldn't figure out what was wrong. Finding himself somewhat confused, Manurva didn't think that they would be taking a bath altogether. Just thinking about it sent shivers running through Manurva's body. He hurriedly turned away and, feeling awkward, quickly headed towards the hot spring. Yusa turned to Mira and Merle, offering them to grab some refreshments from the refrigerator. The girls gladly accepted the offer and thanked him. Merle hurried to the refrigerator, pleased at how well these drinks quenched her thirst. Yusu and Manurva headed to the next room to change and finally enjoy a long-awaited bath. Manurva apologized to Yusu, explaining his strange behavior by saying that this was all new to him. Yusu understood and smiled, thinking that things probably worked a little differently in this world than they did in his. He realized that everyone had their own way of experiencing moments like this, and that it was important to respect everyone's personal boundaries and habits. Manurva stated that she could get used to new things, but Yusa didn't understand why there was a need to get used to things at all. Deciding not to dwell on the situation, Yusa suggested that Manurva hurry up and get into the tub sooner. He was sure that resting and relaxing would help everyone forget the awkward moments and enjoy the moment. Lowering himself into the water, Yusu's body immediately relaxed, the warmth enveloping him pleasantly, washing away the fatigue and tension. He exhaled with relief and smiled, savoring the moment. Looking around, he shouted to Manurva not to hesitate and to join him as soon as possible, for the water was simply glorious. However, seeing the way Manurva appeared, Yusu was surprised. Manurva was standing at the edge of the bathtub, wrapped in a towel from head to toe, and looked extremely wary. He said that, like his face, he wasn't ready to show his body, and asked if Yusu would mind if he used perception-blocking magic. Yusa felt slightly embarrassed but nodded demurely. He didn't see anything wrong with it if it made Manurva feel more comfortable. Admitting that one day Yusu would see everything anyway, Manurva carefully stepped into the water, still partially invisible due to the spell he had cast. Yusu, trying to support his friend, calmly told him not to worry about it so much. However, it all sounded rather ambiguous. Michelle calmly walked into the water and sat down next to Yusu, making herself comfortable. Yusa cast an attentive glance at Manurva, a little surprised at his calmness. Manurva, noticing the look, only sank a little deeper into the water, comforting himself with the thought that his friend couldn't see anything anyway, the spell safely hiding anything unnecessary. Wondering how well developed Manurva's pectoral muscles must be, as expected of an experienced adventurer, Yusu involuntarily held his gaze on the silhouette of his acquaintance. He scrutinized the outline, barely visible through the light haze of vapor and protective magic, feeling a strange curiosity he couldn't quite explain. Suddenly, Yusu jumped up in the water, remembering that he wanted to try out his new item, a water pistol. However, when he turned around to look for his belongings, he was surprised to notice that the chair they were lying on was gone. It turned out that the chair had been stolen by Mira, who was already running around with a mischievous smile, holding a water pistol in her hands and clearly going to try it out. Hearing that Yusa had a problem, Michelle calmly offered her help. Without hesitation, she activated her magic and a light stream of energy slid through the water. 2 flat rocks suddenly appeared from the ground, perfect for using as chairs. Yusu, overjoyed, quickly sat down on one of them and finally got to grips with his water pistol. He happily filled it with water and took aim, ready to test the toy in action. Yusu was overjoyed that everything was working as it should, and with a smile, he suggested that Manurva try the toy in action as well. Manurva reluctantly agreed, realizing that there was no avoiding participating in this activity. A little hesitant, Manurva stood next to Yusu, ready for the experiment. He took the toy, directing a stream of water at his back. Yusu, noticing Manurva's relaxation from the water gun, asked if he liked the toy. Manurva, sitting next to him, added that the toy's action was indeed very pleasant. Yusu, after thinking about it for a bit, had to agree with him, feeling the slight tingle from the water relax his muscles too. Yusu suggested to Manurva that he could shoot himself in the back with a water gun, since it was rather difficult to hit that area directly himself. However, Manurva took Yusu's words completely differently and became very embarrassed. His face turned red for a moment, and he hurriedly turned away, unable to explain what exactly made him so embarrassed. Manurva, upon hearing Yusu's suggestion, immediately rushed at him, screaming in panic at him not to do it. In a burst of emotion, she knocked him to the ground. Yusu, completely unaware of what had just happened, decided to change the subject and suggested that Manurva go get the Ramoon, hoping it would relieve the tension. Just as suddenly Merle threw herself right at Yusu with the bottle in her hands, desperately trying to open it but in tears not knowing how to do so. Yusu, a little taken aback by her panic, reacted quickly. He showed her how to properly open the bottle and easily did the job, calming her down. Merle enjoyed the sweet and satisfying drink with a smile, feeling the flavor of the Ramoon fill her with joy. Mira, meanwhile, was pleased not only with the flavor, but also with the fact that, on top of that, she felt her magical power within become smoother and more stable. The drink indeed turned out to be not only tasty, but also helpful in maintaining her power. After taking a sip, Yusuf smiled and summarized his verdict that the drink, on top of everything else, was also very tasty. He enjoyed its refreshing flavor and the way it helped him relax and feel better. Yusuf took another sip and thought for a moment. It had been almost a year since he had last drunk this drink. Images of summer vacations, fairs, and public baths where people enjoyed Ramoon began to surface in his mind. For him, This drink had become something special, associated with important memories, warmth and joy. Memories of today also became inherently linked to this drink, imprinted in his heart. Yusuf realized that this moment had become another precious memory that he would treasure. The entire company sat on a stone bench made by Manurva, enjoying the view of the hot spring. The waterfall in the corner added to the coziness, and a good mood hung in the air. It was quiet and peaceful here. There were no monsters, and everyone could just relax and unwind. The atmosphere was so peaceful that some were drawn to sleep. Mira, after such a wonderful rest, felt refreshed and ready to easily go to the second floor of the dungeon to face new challenges and monsters. Everyone was shocked, looking at Mira, who seemed to have just enjoyed a moment of complete peace and relaxation, and was now ready to go to work. Her determination surprised everyone, and they turned around in amazement at her. A week later, a new signboard appeared near the hot spring, which attracted the attention of all adventurers. Now everyone who passed by knew that not only could they rest here, but also regain their strength. Manurva, without wasting any time, used her earth magic to create a clear separation between the male and female halves of the hot spring, thus ensuring comfort and privacy for all vacationers. As the flow of people interested in rest and relaxation increased, so did the demand for the water pistols that Yusuf had brought with him. His product proved to be in demand. Yusuf's business flourished, and his candy shop soon gained a new wave of customers due to the popularity of the water pistols. The massage that the gun provided after a hard adventure became a special treat for adventurers, especially those who had already experienced the hardships of the dungeons. This innovation attracted the attention of veterans, those very experienced and hardened adventurers who had not previously been frequent customers in his candy shop. With the opening of the hot spring, the demand for drinks increased significantly. Customers enjoyed relaxing in the water and were eager to buy refreshing beverages. Coffee with milk became popular among those looking for an invigorating drink after a long day, and fruit juices among those looking to quench their thirst after treatments. Yusuf invited Mirai and Sanagi to work together since Sanagi was making a new sword for him, which also contributed to his success. They thanked Yusuf for the invitation, noting that he had helped their business considerably. It was much more successful than they could have expected, and the number of customers only increased every day. On top of that, the balloon game was a real hit, attracting crowds of adventurers, ready to stand in line for hours in hopes of getting their long-awaited panacea. Yusuf was a little embarrassed when he heard people start calling the hot spring by his name. He was flattered, but in his humble opinion, it was already too much. Regardless of what the hot spring was called, Yusuf was glad that this place had become a true vacation spot for adventurers. He hoped that even if people continued to associate him with this place, what was more important was that the springs had become a place to relax, recuperate, and meet up with friends. Just as suddenly, a crowd of soldiers burst into the room, loudly wondering if Yahagi's pastry shop was here. Yusuf instantly froze, terror gripping him. Had the soldiers really come for him? A richly dressed middle-aged man with a bushy mustache entered the room behind the soldiers and immediately attracted attention. His fingers glittered with expensive jewelry, and his clothes were impeccably expensive and elegant. Every detail of his attire spoke of his high social status, and his every step radiated confidence and importance. Yusuf froze, watching the man with his mouth open. Questions were rushing through his mind. Who was he? Was this man really an aristocrat? Near the entrance to the hot spring, Yusuf once again found himself in an awkward position, surrounded by soldiers. He could feel the intense gazes on him and didn't know how to act. The soldiers who came in, led by an aristocrat, were serious, their stern facial expressions and the tense atmosphere around them creating a feeling that the situation could take an unexpected turn. The customers and friends of Yusuf who were in the room were watching with panic in their eyes, each of them trying to figure out what kind of noisy visitation had occurred in their peaceful vacation spot. The aristocrat looked over Yusu and the rest of the company with a serious face, clearly determined to take decisive action. Yusu felt the tension in the air rise and realized that he was once again in an uncomfortable position, surrounded by soldiers. He quickly remembered that he had recently been told that no license was required for stores open in the dungeon, and hoped that would be enough of an argument for them to handle the situation calmly. The aristocrat, not expecting such a response, slowed his gesture and informed with a slight sigh that this was in fact not the case. With regret in his voice, he pointed with his hand at the soldiers standing in the room. Their presence seemed to only add to the tension. The aristocrat stated with strength in his voice that a rumor had reached him about the sale of panacea in the candy store. He had come to see for himself. His words, spoken with such a determined tone, hung in the air like a threat. Yusu, hearing the true reason for the visit, exhaled in relief. He realized that he had been so worried for nothing, and that this whole misunderstanding was not that serious. He felt the tension leave his body, and as he calmed down a bit, he became more confident. He pointed to the automaton, defeating it was a panacea. The aristocrat, after listening to the explanation, stepped towards the automaton with a determined look. He was full of confidence and determination, as if it was a matter of honor. Despite his initially stern and imperious manner, it was clear that he meant no harm towards the pastry shop or Yusu himself. The aristocrat took out a huge, polished and shiny coin from his pocket that could easily serve as a piece of jewelry for any collection. The value of this coin, he said, was as much as 100,000 liras. Yusu shivered at this sum, and said with undisguised excitement that he did not have so much money to offer in exchange. Not expecting such an answer, the frustrated aristocrat looked around and, tightening his lips, asked if any of the soldiers had some change. One of the soldiers handed over some coins, and the aristocrat took them and walked over to the machine with determination, intending to try and win a panacea. Yusu, relaxing a bit, explained that there was a great demand for the machine and the queue was constantly growing. Therefore, the aristocrat needed to wait his turn, and after he tried it, he would stand at the back again. The aristocrat, confident of his victory, nodded, accepting the rules of the game. He seemed determined, but became more and more relaxed with each attempt. His demeanor betrayed that behind all this outward austerity was a kind and honest man. Time passed, and despite his best efforts, he ran out of coins and could not win the panacea. His face darkened, and he looked regretfully around the machine, realizing that he had failed to achieve his goal. The aristocrat, with an expression of slight disappointment, decided to ask a direct question without hiding the doubt in his voice. He asked if it was even possible to pass this game, because his confidence in success was already beginning to falter. Yusu, noticing his confusion, decided to demonstrate with a slight smile that the game was indeed passable, and even more so, quite fair. He confidently walked over to the machine, inserted a coin, and using his skills, quickly and deftly won the panacea. The nobleman, bowing deeply, respectfully asked to be handed the panacea he had won, but Yusu, feeling awkward, replied that he could make no exceptions, even for such an important guest. He explained that the rules of the game were the same for everyone, and he had no right to break them. The aristocrat introduced himself as Mosl, a court aristocrat, and with a serious expression added that the panacea in Yusu's hands was actually necessary for the king himself. Yusu, upon hearing this, immediately realized that his guest was indeed a nobleman. He thought for a moment, and then asked Mo if he was really going to present the panacea to the king as he had been informed. Mo confidently answered in the affirmative, confirming that this step was necessary to save the king. If the situation were to develop like this, and the panacea did not end up in the king's hands, the king's affairs would begin to drag on, which in turn could lead to problems for the country. Mira, after listening to everything that was said, turned to Yasuo and said with determination in her voice that he would have to help. Yusu was persuaded to agree, but was firmly told that next time the panacea would have to be obtained by winning the game as stipulated in the rules. He was not inclined to give in to such requests and preferred to follow the established rules. Mosl couldn't hide his smile upon hearing this, and his face lit up with gratitude. He thanked Yusu, assuring that with this remedy, the king would definitely recover and return to his normal state. Once the entire company, including the noblemen and the guards, had quickly disappeared, Yusu was left standing in the room, trying to comprehend what had happened. He was a bit stunned, but he suddenly noticed that a shiny coin had been left on the floor. It was the same 100,000 lira coin that the aristocrat had so carelessly left behind in his haste. Yusu turned to Manurva and clarified whether the king was sick with the witch's curse, and whether it was possible to remove it with a panacea. Manurva, with a thoughtful expression on his face, answered in the negative. Manurva explained that a panacea could cure the king of many illnesses, but if it was a curse, it would not have a lasting effect. A panacea will help for a while, but eventually the symptoms will return. A curse requires special magic and cannot simply be cured with a cure. Yusu was sure that the nobleman would return to try to get the panacea again, especially after seeing his determination. Manurva agreed with him, adding that despite the possible return, the effects of the curse would eventually wear off anyway, and the king would recover. Yusa asked in surprise how Manurva knew such details about the curse. Manurva, noticing that the question was posed rather unexpectedly, awkwardly began to excuse that he had simply heard about it from others. In the end, in order not to reveal her own identity, Michelle was forced to say that she had heard about it from the witch herself. Yusuf wondered if Manurva and Michelle knew each other. A few days later, when opening the candy shop, Yusuf was quite surprised by what he saw. Yusuf noticed that there were fur models in his assortment, and it wasn't an ordinary toy, but the famous Gungaf robot model itself. Moreover, it was made in excellent quality. It was a mobile warrior, which was a plastic model that could be assembled without glue. But the most interesting thing was that it could move with magic, which made this toy unique. Manurva, scrutinizing the model, clarified if it was a small golem. Yusuf, smiling, explained that it was not a golem, but a model that could be assembled and used for play. It represents a robot that moves thanks to magic. Yusuf went on to explain that the models actually had different types, each with their own specialties. For example, the Celestial Soldier was designed for close combat, equipped with heavy weapons capable of inflicting great damage on opponents. The Water Machine Gun, on the other hand, was a more versatile soldier with high stability and good characteristics for support in various situations. Yusa emphasized that the main advantage of these models was that no additional tools were required to assemble them. This was an important element that set these models apart from others. Everything was thought out so that assembly was as convenient as possible and did not require any extra effort. After the final click, the figure was assembled. Yusa marveled at how awesome these mechanisms were. Each piece fit perfectly with the others, creating a model that was not only aesthetically pleasing, but functional as well. Judging from the instructions included with the kit, they could be played with using magic. Not understanding how it worked, Yusu decided to try to replicate the steps described in the instructions. He uttered the necessary phrase as instructed, and the Gungaf came to life. The mechanism began to move, making sounds similar to the quiet footsteps of metal legs. Yusuf watched in amazement as the model, or rather mechanical warrior, performed complex movements and seemed to even speak. Yusu was surprised to see the figure that stood opposite his Gungaf. It was the figure of Manurva, but in a completely different guise, in the form of the villain's fur. His appearance was menacing, with dark metal parts and intimidating weapons. Manurva explained that he had chosen such an opponent based on the type of weapon. Manurva explained that it was important to regulate the magic power properly for the mech to work consistently. Yusu, concentrating, tried to adjust his figure to avoid mistakes and make the model more efficient. The battle began, and Yusuf controlled his mech with a smile. The mech moved, jumped, and dodged attacks, making the battle exciting and intense. Yusuf was pleased with his victory, and Manurva recognized that Yusuf was amazing in his actions and strategy as always. Once Gungaf had easily plowed the villain's mech to the ground, Yusuf walked over to his mech with a smile and enthusiastically began to explain the rules of the game. He pointed out that in order to win, you not only had to knock your opponent down, but you had to keep him on the ground by counting to 3, just like in real combat. Manurva stood pensive, looking at her non-functioning mecha that lay on the ground. She hadn't expected this outcome despite her efforts. The mecha couldn't get to its feet, which meant that victory was on Yusuf's side. Yusuf, overflowing with enthusiasm, began to enthusiastically tell those around him that they had just witnessed a real professional fight. His speech grew more and more fervent as he explained the importance of controlling the mecha, calculating the power of magic, and calculating actions ahead of time. Merle watched the fight with curiosity, and after a moment's thought, she recognized that it looked really exciting. Her eyes lit up with interest, and with a slight smile, she asked for one for herself. Yusuf, upon hearing her choice, was not only pleased to have a new enthusiastic participant, but also pleased that her choice of fur was excellent. Mira joined the others as well, choosing one of the models for herself. Yusuf was genuinely pleased. Seeing his hobby becoming more and more popular brought him real pleasure. Mira spoke passionately about how she especially liked how fast her mech moved, as speed was an important quality for her. Merle replied with a slight chuckle that it was to be expected. Mira had always had trouble with sports. Garm, watching the excitement around the battle models, didn't want to be left out and picked one for himself. The excitement around the new product quickly grew, and a crowd gathered around the counter, eager to get their own mech. In the midst of this commotion, Rugal, with sadness in his voice, confessed that he too would like to have one, but he was short of funds. Seeing the sincere desire and knowing Rugal as a loyal and reliable customer, Yusuf promised with a slight smile that he would set aside one model for him, making an exception to the general rules. Surprisingly, it wasn't long before the entire stock of combat warriors was completely sold out. The rave reviews, the lightning-fast spread of rumors, and the keen interest did their job, and the counters emptied faster than expected. When new visitors excitedly approached Yusuf, hoping to purchase the coveted toy, he regretfully informed them that everything was sold out and asked them to come back tomorrow. It was obvious that this novelty was destined for success. A few days later, the toys continued to be incredibly popular. In the courtyard, at the hot springs, and even in the corridors of the dungeon, adventurers of all ages could be seen enthusiastically fighting with their mechs. The spectacular battles took place in a specially created arena for mobile warriors, a circular platform that Manurva had erected with the help of earth magic. Each battle drew a crowd of spectators, and the participants, with serious faces, controlled their models with magical energy, demonstrating agility, strategy, and skill in battle. Only 4 days had passed since the launch, and the furs were selling like hotcakes, with around 40 boxes sold daily, and a new batch appearing on the shelves every morning. Interest did not subside, but on the contrary, only grew. Merle was especially successful, as she surprised everyone with her skill and control of her fur, regularly winning fights and becoming a local star in the arena. She came to Yasuo for another bottle of ramen, and he was not even surprised by her victory. Merle explained with a satisfied smile that it was because of the special coloring of her fur. One shoulder was dyed red. Merle took a sip of ramen, savoring the victory. Yusuf wondered if the color of her warrior was like the original in his homeworld. Suddenly remembering something, all of a sudden, Merle felt her throat go dry and suddenly choked. Merle approached Tsunade with a question about the cost of a mecha battle axe. When she heard the price, she raised her eyebrows. The amount was really impressive. However, she did not lose her confidence and said with determination that she would definitely buy one soon. The fire of determination burned in her eyes, and the smile she shared with the others was full of confidence in her future success. The miniature weapons that Sanada had created for mobile warriors were the latest trend in battle. The use of the weapons in close combat added extra dynamics and spectacle to the new mechs. The blacksmith was pleased that his creation had become so popular, because thanks to Yahagi, his business began to bring in significant income. If a mech took damage above a certain level during a battle, the magical connection between the mechanical body and its owner was broken. In this case, the fight would end in a knockout, and the winner would become obvious. Suddenly, an adventurer with a child approached the counter and, smiling, asked if there were any mobile warriors left. He had heard that it was a great toy for magic manipulation classes, helping children develop skills in controlling magic. Yusuf had noticed how mechs had recently started to gain a special place in the developmental toy market, and realized that this was another step to solidify their position as not only a toy, but also a useful tool for learning magic. That evening, Yusuf smiled as he counted his proceeds. He was pleased, for if this was all he needed, he could finally get closer to the fulfillment of his cherished wish. He could finally realize his dream, to rent an apartment. Yusuf, deciding it was time to move on, bid farewell to the hotel hostess with a smile. She, in turn, was genuinely upset. After all, he was one of her most loyal and decent customers. Yusuf promised himself that despite the new stage in his life, he would be sure to visit her from time to time. There were 2 rooms in his new apartment. There was no bathroom, and the toilet was shared, which by the looks of it was pretty typical for this type of housing. There was only one problem. Manurva came to visit him almost every day. Today, she had brought ingredients for dinner, fresh vegetables that she was going to make into a stew. The kitchen had already become a real base for Manurva. She was bringing in new cooking utensils. Yusuf noticed her settling into his home, as if she didn't realize it, and was upset by what was happening. Yusuf thought about how the situation would have played out if he had a girlfriend. He imagined that she might have been upset by what was going on, and might have even hated him for not stopping Manurva's intrusive presence. At that moment, Manurva turned around abruptly. The fury in her eyes was evident, and with a strain in her voice, she asked if he had gotten himself a girlfriend. Yusuf, a little embarrassed by Manurva's harsh reaction, asked if it was such an offense that he could have a girlfriend. However, he quickly admitted that he didn't actually have one. Manurva, noticing his words, continued to remain tense. Yusuf continued to say that if he had a girlfriend, she would surely be jealous if Manurva continued to cook him dinners every night. Manurva, unable to stand it, became furious, thinking that people like that were evil. She couldn't understand why it was so important for him to limit her help when she just wanted to help. Yusuf, however, was adamant that he was right and added that when he got a girlfriend, Manurva would have to take away all of her kitchen utensils that she had brought and stop cooking. Manurva, watching his reaction, asked if Yusuf really wished to get a girlfriend. Yusuf, after thinking about it for a bit, replied that talking about different things and dating could enrich life, though he wasn't sure about that. Yusuf continued that if Manurva continued to stay at his place every night, when he got a girlfriend, it would be pretty weird. He clarified that he didn't mind Manurva, but he didn't like the idea of her continuing to stay over every night. Yusu was trying to convey that personal boundaries and space were important to him, especially if he was going to have someone else he wanted to spend time with. Manurva realized that Yusu really wanted to build a relationship with someone special, and that a long-term union was important to him. Manurva decided that tonight was going to be special. She was preparing something unusual to create an atmosphere of celebration and joy. Yusu thanked Manurva for dinner, trying not to make eye contact. Manurva, setting the dishes on the table, inquired curiously if Yusu had originally intended to drink tonight. Michelle, leisurely pouring a fragrant drink resembling a high-class brandy into glasses, was clearly pouring Yusu noticeably more. He, grinning, threw at a joke about how it looked like he was about to get drunk. After a while, Michelle looked at Yusu with a slight smile and asked if he really wanted to get a girlfriend. He replied, a little embarrassed, that he wanted to start a family one day, to have someone to come home to. Michelle leaned closer curiously, not missing the opportunity to ask the next question. She wondered what kind of girls Yusuha liked. The man hesitated a bit. She learned that he liked girls like Mira, sophisticated and beautiful, as well as girls like Merle, energetic and fun, with a bright vivacity in their personality. However, Yusuf recognized with a slight sigh that, despite their likability, Mira and Merle were too young for him. Michelle hadn't expected to hear such a thing. They dined quietly that evening, enjoying a fine dinner and the soft aroma of alcohol, while their conversation remained light and carefree, as if distant from all the worries of the world. Yusuf caught himself thinking that the atmosphere of the evening seemed strange to him. Everything going on felt like a real date, with warm, quiet conversations and glasses in hand. Michelle, summarizing the conversation, remarked with a smile that Yasuha, in fact, liked grown-up, beautiful women who knew how to cook. Then, a little mockingly, she wondered if he would add his status as the strongest adventurer to that list as well. Falling asleep with a slight smile on his face, Yusuf muttered quietly that perhaps she should also be good. Falling asleep right at the table, sitting up and with a slight smile on his face, Yusuf looked unaccustomedly carefree. Michelle, watching him, thought for a moment. Then, making sure he was sound asleep, she slowly removed her mask. She pronounced that she would try to be kinder to approach Yusuf. A few days later, Mira approached Yusuha with an unexpected idea. She looked a little flustered, but confident in her proposal. Mira suggested that Yusuf organize a mobile warrior tournament, attracting more and more players and spectators. Yusuf recognized that the idea of a tournament was indeed interesting and promising. He agreed to give it a try, knowing that it could not only cheer people up, but also attract new customers. Yusuf wondered what kind of prize could be truly valuable to the tournament participants. He realized that giving something of his goods as a gift was the obvious choice, but he wanted something special to make the tournament even more attractive and memorable. Yusuf thought of a panacea as a possible prize for the tournament. When Yusuf announced that the panacea would be the grand prize for the tournament, it caused quite a furor among the buyers and fans of mobile warriors. People were ecstatic. They had long dreamed of such a unique and powerful remedy that could rid them of any ailments. Just as the excitement around the tournament was building, a familiar aristocrat entered the room, the same aristocrat who had come for the panacea earlier. With a confident stride, he approached Yusuf and asked if he too could participate in the tournament. Yusuf, unsurprised, replied that anyone with a mobile warrior could participate. It was just in time because the nobleman once again needed a new batch of medicine for the king. For him, this tournament was a great opportunity to obtain the panacea. The aristocrat declared with determination that he would buy all the warriors that were available without thinking about the quantity. Hearing this, Yusu involuntarily hesitated. He began to wonder if he had overdone the reward.